that. Augustine, could you do a roll call, please?
Thank you. I'll start with public member Frank Cardenas,
Here.
Deputy Secretary Virginia Jemison,
Here.
Secretary Yana Garcia,
Here.
Secretary Tomiko Moas, Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz, Deputy Secretary Darwin Musavi,
Here.
Chief Equity Officer Daniel Torres,
Here.
Public Member Nicole Capretz,
Here.
Secretary Wade Crowfoot,
Here.
Deputy Secretary Noaki Schwartz.
Here.
Skip
We have
C,
quorum.
but I'm here too.
Here.
And last but not least, Director Asefa.
Here. Great. Could you walk us through the public comments?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to everyone joining us today, in person, online, or by phone through the Zoom webinar platform, or where the meeting is being live streamed on SGC's YouTube channel or Cal EPA's live webcast. I'm here to provide some information to help guide us all through the processes for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform doesn't enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question during the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you are using the online Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function. Several members of the SGC team are monitoring the Zoom Q&A function to facilitate public access to the council meeting and may remove disruptive or threatening content. If you have joined by phone and have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. If you do not have access to email, you may text or call 916-634-3359. If you plan to make in-person public comment, you must fill out a comment card provided at the table near the back of the room. Please fill out the public comment card to indicate your name and which item you would like to comment on. Please bring your comment card to the table at the front to my right with the sign collecting public comment cards. When the chair opens a public comment period for your item, we will read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. Please line up by the podium, and when you have lined up, we will call on your name. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name to the podium. If you plan to make public comment, remote public comment, you must be joining the meeting via Zoom, either through your desktop or phone, or by calling in by phone. To make a public comment, visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. You'll need to complete separate forms for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time prior to the beginning of the public comment period. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we will read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. When you hear your name in the list, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click Raise Hand. Under the Participants menu, you can find that at the bottom of your screen. To raise your hand by phone, you can press *9. If you are unable to complete the online form but would like to make a public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. A timer will be screen shared. Please monitor the timer and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or by phone, you will be notified when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action once we mute your microphone. Thank you all for your participation. Back to you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Augustine. So we'll start with the approval of the June 26, 2024 meeting minutes. I will remind my colleagues that you need not have attended these meetings to vote on the minutes adoption, but you may abstain. We'll have an opportunity for council discussion, then we'll have public comments, if any, on this item. Do we have any public comments?
No public comments for this item.
Comments, so can I have any discussion? Council members? Any, I have some motion. Goes move is awesome. Roll call.
Director Samasefa,
Yes.
Public Member Frank Cardenas,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Regina Jameson,
Yes.
Secretary Yana Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Tomiko Mas, Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz, Deputy Secretary Darwin Musavi, Chief Equity Officer Daniel Torres,
Yes.
Public Member Nikoka Pretz,
Yes.
Secretary Wade Crowfoot,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Milwaukee Shorts.
Great. Item 4 is the Executive Director's report. This will be Matt Reed's first Executive Director's report. He is acting Executive Director since Lynn Van Cook-Liebert left. And I want to thank Matt. He's stepped up to the position from day one, and I want to thank you. And with that, I will ask you to provide the Director's report.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's truly an honor to be in front of this council and to be leading this team on such a great day as we do our statutory duty and move so many great projects forward. So here to introduce the Acting Executive Director's report for the month of August. And we are going to begin with some wonderful staffing updates. We're also going to be providing and highlighting the contributions of our executive fellows in this staff report and doing a brief overview of some very powerful updates from our many great programs. But we'll begin with our new staff. Would like to highlight hires within kind of across program activities. Ella Manishil is the Associate Planner for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, and we welcome Ella. Nani Ifiafobi is a new Associate Planner for the Transformative Climate Communities Program, and as is Joyce Stee. And we also welcome Caleb Swanson, who is our Agricultural Land Equity Analyst for our Land Equity Initiative. We're so happy to have the additional capacity, the insights of these thoughtful staff, and we're just really excited to be bringing them on board. It was a lot of effort to bring these new staff on board, and I welcome applause for these new staff members. And really excited to acknowledge the transformative work of SGC and this council's executive fellows. It's been a huge year, so we'll move to the next slide for executive fellows. It's been a huge year for the executive fellows program, and for anyone familiar with the program, they know that the goals of the program are to provide these fellows with a superior learning opportunity in California state government, and I think that that's what everyone got. With specific focus on public policy making and instilling an appreciation for public service, while also we're developing the next generation of future leaders. I want to also highlight that a significant amount of SGC staff is executive fellows alums, and we benefit from their contributions and expertise across government every day. Fellows are selected by Representative Sac State, the Office of the Governor, and members of your agencies and departments from a highly competitive pool, and they're granted dual status within Sac State as grad students and as staff. And upon successful completion, they get credits within their public policy and administration program. So SGC was fortunate this year to receive the placement of 2 executive fellows. Camille Randolph was placed with the Community Investments and Planning team, and Alex Walker with the Equity and Government Transformation, Alex C. Walker, in the Equity and Government Transformation team. These 2 have been an integral part of our team, and it's this is not lip service. It's been through and through, and we'll miss them dearly. We just want to highlight a couple accomplishments because they won't raise it themselves. They're responsible for successfully leading grant funding to apply for some of our strategies and initiatives, bringing federal dollars into state government and through really successful grant writing, co-leading the Housing and Transportation Capacity Building State Working Group, leading and hiring, staffing, running our summer internships program, authoring research that supports deeper engagement and investments with tribes across our programs, and supporting executive leaders in launching new programs within the CRC, tribal capacity, and the Connecting Communities programs. So very thankful for all of that work. It's a huge list, and we're just really excited to have had them and to continue to have them be a part of our family. So we've invited Alex and Camille to provide some brief remarks marking the end of their service. And so with that, I want to pass it first to Alex Walker. If you can come up. We'll step away from the job that he's currently performing. Make sure that's, yeah.
I'm tall, so I'm going to hold the mic. And thank you, Matt. And good afternoon, Council. My name is Alex C. Walker. I'm an executive fellow, proudly serving the California Strategic Growth Council under the Equity and Government Transformation portfolio. I just really want to take a moment to not only recognize my fellow fellows across different agencies, but to recognize SGC staff. I applied for the fellowship 6 times before I earned a spot, and I might cry, sorry, but it's been truly remarkable. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity and the trust that you put in me to do this work for the people of California. I see service as a virtue, and it's something I'm deeply passionate about, and this opportunity has been nothing but transformative and eye-opening in so many ways. I want to personally thank my mentor, Ina Lupine, for everything she's done for me, her thoughtful mentorship, her kindness, her grace, her generosity, and her trust that she put in me to do the work. Thank you so much for everything. I really want to express my appreciation to SGC staff. I hope this council recognizes the talent and treasure they are in everything they do. And I just really want to take the opportunity to thank you for hosting Executive Fellows this year and encourage you to continue to do the same next and following years. Thank you again for this opportunity. And please feel free to stay in touch as I move on to my next steps and focus on my upcoming wedding. Thank you.
Great.
And it's an honor to invite Camille Randolph to also provide her remarks and perspective. There, forgive me.
Hi all, my name is on. Yeah, my name is Camille Randolph. I was an executive fellow at the Strategic Growth Council, and I'm now a program analyst at the Racial Equity Commission. And I just really want to start out by thanking Amar, Matt, and everyone at SGC leadership for a truly transformative year. I've learned so much. For example, I now know the acronyms for low income housing tax credit and metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. To my mentor, Amar, thank you for opening so many doors, always lending an ear, and allowing me to help run the Housing and Transportation Subcommittee on Capacity Development. I also want to thank everyone in the Community Investments and Planning portfolio. I know some of them are here right now, for immediately welcoming me into your program teams. It's meant so much to work with all of you. With these teams, I've gotten the opportunity to help catalyze a $2 million investment into tens and millions of dollars in federal funding with Connecting Communities, work on the first round of community resilience centers, and influence tribal accessibility of the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, Round 10 guidelines. And lastly, I just want to thank the council and key staff for your leadership over this past year. I'm so proud to have been an executive fellow at SGC, and thank you again.
So we've also had the honor of working with executive fellows within your agencies and the departments that you oversee, and want to just highlight April Martinez from the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. If we can withhold applause until the end of the names, I think we'll. But Micah Wilcox with the California State Transportation Agency, Margaret Phipps from the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Maya Sue from California Natural Resources Agency, Scott Anglem from the California Health and Human Services Agency, Maya Steinhardt from the California Environmental Protection Agency, and Maya Tumujum and Kara Bollock from the Office of Planning and Research. now you may apply. Yeah.
Yes.
Are we permitted to interrupt?
Yes.
I mean, a positive way,
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Okay, very quickly. I just tell you, look, I work in an industry, as you know, that helps develop young people, right? Okay. You've heard we receive the government that we deserve, right? What we deserve is the caliber of young people, of these professionals we just heard. And if we don't afford them the opportunity to shadow, mentor, mistake, error, correct in an executive capacity, then they never will rise to those positions where we need that caliber of thoughtfulness, kindness, insight, intellect in these important roles. You know, we talk about like the big ticket investment building brick and mortar thing, right? And we minimize the investment and the dividends that this kind of humanity will pay for us in the future. And so I hope that we're not even entertaining the idea of limiting. I'll make a motion to limit other things before we limit the resources available to continue this kind of program at the executive level, really, because you are the kind of person that they need to sort of interact with to develop those skills. And so often we don't afford them those kinds of opportunities. So just, you know, just a thank you for those very thoughtful remarks from both of you, but also from all of the executive fellows. Apologize for the interruption.
I second that, and thank you, Chancellor, for speaking as a chancellor and as an educator, not just as a council member, but completely agree.
You know, I will share the good news that we're currently working on our applications for the next round of executive fellows. This is an annual cycle, and
By the way, that was not orchestrated.
right. If you want to be looped in on emails, we welcome more hands in the document. So want to go to our next slide and talk a little bit about our investment programs and some highlights that we've had over the past couple months. So across our investment programs, we see projects coming online with community celebrations, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, and different types of innovative activations. This summer alone, the SALT team reported 6 easements closing as a result of awards made by this council, resulting in the permanent conservation of over 20,000 acres of land to support cattle grazing, dry land farming, irrigated agriculture across 6 California counties. Last week, I had the pleasure of joining our HSC team in East Los Angeles to celebrate the opening of Las Dalias. That's 78 new affordable homes already leasing in the heart of East Los Angeles. Las Dalias is a $23.86 million grant from SGC that includes $9.4 million dedicated to neighborhood transportation investments. Also want to highlight another photo from this slide, which is a few weeks back, the CRC team, joined by Councilmember Capretz, participated in the groundbreaking in San Ysidro for the La Familia Community Resilience Center. And the TCC team celebrated projects coming online for Watts Rising, which was a round 1 awardee. So program side, TCC is also refining its program procedures for round 4 and round 5 advanced pay. And between Go Lucy, the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, we are working with them on agency-wide policies to promote responsible, fast administration of advanced pay. TCC just held a successful workshop last week on advanced pay for their awardees and partners, and over 120 attendees came to that. So today, TCC is going to present a technical amendment to the round 4 and 5 guidelines. You'll also hear recommendations for awards for the HSC 8th round before our panel discussion on racial equity. So we've also had great success in our federal funding initiatives. So in Connecting Communities program has seen a huge couple of months. I want to highlight some of the success within the US EPA Community Change Grant. Reminder, last December, this council awarded 4 of 6 applicants for the TCC program implementation funding pot. These requests were very compelling, and ultimately 4 were awarded as opposed to 3. Decision was not made lightly to keep our commitment for transformative funding, but we did this knowing that advancing our efforts with this new Connecting Communities initiative could find ways to leverage federal funding, and we were successful in helping to make that happen. So there was an announcement in July that the 3 applicants to TCC were going to be awarded federal funding under that US EPA program, the La Familia Counseling Center in Sacramento, the City of Bakersfield, and the San Diego Foundation. So it's been an absolutely incredible year and success for the proof of concept of the Connecting Communities program. So thank you. That is great. Next, following Augustine's reminder on public comment, I'd like to hand it back to Chair Acefa.
Great. Well, I just want to congratulate your new staff again for joining SGC. Ella, Noni, Joyce, and Caleb, welcome. And then Camille and Alex for executive fellows, the values that you bring to this team and why this program usually is really a successful program is because of people, creative and altruistic people who come here to do, coming here not for the money, but for the value that this program and this service provides. So thank you for your work here. In terms of comments, I think, and I'm just really excited about the Connecting Communities program. When this became a priority, that was just an abstract idea because of all the oversubscribed grant. This is one of the best examples and results just within a very short time. To have at least 3 of those funded because of work that is just remarkable. And it's something that is really needed across all our grant programs, as we know, whether it's around climate or equity or any of our grant programs, so way oversubscribed. Best way of using, our resources in terms of assistance. So that's really exciting from that perspective. So that will have public comments, but council comments first. Fellow council members.
If members of the public would like to comment on this item, please submit a public comment card at the front of the table. To make virtual public comment, please visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Acefa.
Do you have any?
No public comment items. No public comment for this item.
Great. We don't have any council comments. We'll move to the next item, which is a consent agenda. The consent calendar is for routine and non-controversial business. So I'll ask Matt to provide a brief overview of the item on the calendar. Matt?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll provide just a brief background and an overview of the proposed changes to make sure that everybody's briefed up and that we've had a public hearing here. But the technical amendment is for Project Strategy 4, solar installation and energy efficiency in the round 4 and 5 guidelines. The TCC team went through a review and found that there were a couple issues with the way that the guidelines interacted with how projects were actually utilizing funding on the ground. And so brought forward, as is common in the TCC program, iterative and minor changes to make sure that projects were successful and responsive to the communities that they serve. So those proposed changes are recategorizing the replacement of electrical panels and new electrical circuit installs as direct costs, and allowing TCC staff to approve a higher repair cap on a grant-by-grant basis. If you have any questions about this, we're welcome to take them. Otherwise, we find this to be supported by the community, and we didn't hear any issues, so we placed it on the consent calendar and would welcome a motion to move the consent calendar.
Great. Any public comments for this item?
No public comment for this item either.
Council questions or discussion? Great. This day is going to go fast. With that, I would welcome a motion and second.
Second.
Second by
Second the
Secretary
motion.
Garcia. Roll call.
Roll call. Director Sam Acefa,
Yes.
Public Member Frank Cardenas,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Regina Jameson,
Yes.
Secretary Yana Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Tomiko Mas, Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz, Deputy Secretary Darwin Musavi,
Yes.
Chief Equity Officer Daniel Torres,
Yes.
Public Member Nicole Capretz,
Yes.
Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Great. So we'll move to item 6, which is an action item on affordable housing and sustainable communities, round 8 awards. So I'll ask Matt and Amar Sid, Deputy Director of Community Investments and Planning, to present item. Then we'll start here with public comments, and then we'll move on some discussion.
Thank you. I'll begin with a quick reminder. If members of the public would like to comment on this item, please submit a public comment card at the front of the table. To make virtual public comment, please visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form.
Right. So I'll kick it off with item 6, our Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Round 8 recommendation for award. First, I want to extend our gratitude for all of our partners, our agency partners, the community, and all of the applicants in this process. Here, we're depicting the multitude of our investments over the last 8 rounds. Round 8, we had over $650 million that was allocated in our NOFA, the Notice of Funding available. Let's move to the next slide. Here's a high-level overview of our current round of recommendation. Round 8 NOFA was posted on January 2024 for approximately $675 million. Funding is a combination of our California Climate Investment Funds, which is a part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds. This also includes some disencumbered funds from previous rounds of awards. We are recommending award of 21 projects across the state, totaling $685 million, 354,807 in awards. Throughout this process and throughout round 8, our investments have totaled over $3.8 billion across the state and across all 8 rounds, including this recommendation. Let's go to the next slide, please. I wanted to provide some scoring updates regarding this round. Within this round of awards, on August 12th, we did post a recommendation of awards. This recommendation was inaccurate, and we rectified that situation, posting a new award list on August 19th. This is included in our meeting packet and posted onto our website. The current round, the current recommended award list still is at 21 projects. In the change from the original award list, we see 2 projects that drop off and 2 projects that come on. On to the next slide, please.
Mark, man, are you able to hear in the back? Some way to. I saw people sort of leaning from the back.
Okay, is this better?
And AV can actually just turn up.
This is better? Okay, perfect. All right. So within this round of recommendations and by the numbers, again, the recommended total of $685 million plus to 21 projects. This extends over 18 jurisdictions across the state, including over 2,000 new rent-restricted homes, 44 new zero-emission transit vehicles, approximately 50 miles of bikeways, more than 60 miles of new accessible walkways, and more than 90 new bus shelters across the state. In this round, we also wanted to discuss, go into the next slide, please. Discuss how this program has statutory requirements and goals for the program. Round 8, we did meet all of our goals except for our tribal goal and set aside. Within our project details here, you see that we do meet our TOD target, ICP, RIPA, regional targets, do not meet tribal. We do meet at least 50% requirement for benefiting disadvantaged communities and our affordable housing funds across the state. Go on to the next slide, please. Part of our statutory requirements and our priorities of the program, existing law requires that the affordable housing and sustainable communities maintain a programmatic requirement of expending over 50% of the program expenditures to projects that are benefiting disadvantaged communities. In previous rounds, this number has been relatively easy to achieve based on the number of applicants and scoring projects that we have received. In round 8, we received 39% of the requested funds that would be in DAC, so a lower amount of projects that were documenting a DAC benefit. To achieve the goal, staff prioritized projects that are located in DACs, regardless of their score and ranking, so that we could meet that requirement. Within our process, we do have a goal of meeting a tribal set-aside. We did not meet that goal. We did not have a tribal applicant this round. Through our technical assistance provisions, we did have our TA providers working with tribal applicants. There were 3 projects that started as a tribal applicant and did not move forward into a full application for submission. We are working with our technical assistance providers now to understand what are some of the complexities that some of the applicants have shared this round, and going through our past rounds to figure out ways that we can improve the program for tribal communities and tribal applicants. Some of what we heard from this round is difficulty solidifying our partnerships with local transportation agencies before the application deadline, local agencies requiring limited waivers of sovereign immunity, and tribal council not wanting to move into a loan process, but instead wanting funds through the grant process. There's also communication about limited capacity to move forward with an application. So again, we're looking at identifying areas for improvement to increase opportunities for tribal applicants to come forward. This may look like more robust engagement, listening sessions, looking at guideline improvements, looking at specific set-asides for tribal populations, potential a tribal application process, separate application process, or a tribal housing pilot program. Again, our commitment is to ensuring that we do have more access to disadvantaged communities, priority populations, and tribes across this program and across all of our SGC's programs. So we will be working extensively to improve these processes, again, to increase opportunities for DAC projects to come online and tribal projects to come online. Let's move on to the next slide, please. In our round 8, we did see eligible cost reductions. In this space, it is a requirement of the state to be responsible in reviewing our processes and the extent of what applicants provide to us so that we can meet our statutory goals and our programmatic goals. The AHSC team identified issues that would require reductions of requested scope and/or funds on 22 projects of the 37 projects that were scored. Some of these areas of reduction included context-sensitive sensitivity related to bikeways, transit investments and van pools that did not include pickup points inside the project area, transit vehicle cost ratios, anti-displacement and program work plans lacking specificity in requesting funds in ineligible costs. There were a significant number of projects that did receive a scope change this year that is part of some of our process improvements over the last couple of rounds with our partnering agencies to identify issues before the application, during the application, and to ensure that we are meeting our requirements for award. Let's move on to the next slide, please. With the changes and some of the reductions that we have seen, it is really transformative to see how many applications are being requested for recommendation across this grant round. 21 projects with over $685 million in investments across the state is beautiful to see. We wanted to highlight at least 3 projects here. These 3 projects provide some of that information, just a tad bit of a window into what these investments could look like across the state. Here we have Casa de la Luz, East Los Angeles, where the applicants are Hollywood Community Housing Corporation and the County of Los Angeles. They requested 37 million plus for 93 affordable homes. Casa de la Luz will provide services that are focusing around affordable housing units in unincorporated East Los Angeles. Next slide, please. We're highlighting here Mills Ranch Apartments in King City. This application is comprised of Community Housing Improvement System and Planning Associates requesting $11.7 million for 39 affordable homes in total, 31 dedicated to farm workers. Mill Ranch Apartments will be farm worker housing with a focus on transit and providing food bank services across Central Coast in King City. We're also highlighting a rendition of community space that is going to be situated next to this development. Let's go on to the next slide. And then lastly, for highlights of the projects, we have 7112 Seagaze Oceanside. This is comprised of applicants from Pacific Southwest Community Development Corporation for $48.7 million for 177 affordable homes. 7112 Seagaze will transform 36 acres of vacant parking lot into transit and retail service to provide affordable homes across the San Diego region. Go on to the next slide. For our action item here, again, we want to recommend 21 projects. Of these 21 projects, today we are also just reminding that we move this meeting up so that some of these projects can move forward into a process of seeking tax credits. That deadline is next week. As a reminder, again, we have over 2,000 rent restriction homes in this recommendation for awards, huge investments across transportation for walkable communities, increased trees and lighting, zero emission transit vehicles and bus shelters, with a combined reduction of estimated 506,424 metric tons of carbon dioxide greenhouse gas reductions through the building investments and transportation projects. Next slide, please. This is the full list of recommended awards. This is in the packet. And we can go to the next slide. And if we're taking this recommendation action, it is to approve the 21 projects that we identified for award.
Great. Thanks. We will start with public comments on this project. With that, Augustine, do we have public comments?
Thank you. I will begin public comment period by reading the names of everyone who signed up to comment on item number 6. We will have in-person comment first. We have 8 virtual public comments and 5 in-person signed up. You will have only 2 minutes to make your comment. The timer will be presented on the screen. If you are calling in, we will notify you when your time is up. For in-person, when you hear your name, please line up by the podium in the order your name was called. I will then call you individually to the podium to speak. The first 3 individuals to step up to the podium will Sally Greenspan, Ellen Morris, and Jamie Parks. Please step up to the podium. Sally, you can begin your public comment when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the council for the opportunity to give these comments. My name is Sally Greenspan, Senior Director with Enterprise Community Partners, a national affordable housing nonprofit. Enterprise has been deeply involved with AHSC since the program's inception, primarily through our role as a technical assistance provider to most AHSC applicants statewide. On behalf of Enterprise, I'd like to congratulate all of the awarded applicants. We know firsthand what a Herculean effort it is to put together an ASIC application, how heartbreaking it can be to lose, and how rewarding it can be to win. Because we love this program so much, we acknowledge that this has been a challenging round. We, like many of you, are disappointed that we were not able to collectively put forward a tribal AHSC application. We know that the program continues to be challenging for many geographic locations. And we know that the program's significant ambitions have led to complexities in the application that are challenging for applicants and state reviewers alike. At the same time, we continue to know that this program has achieved so much: $3.2 billion in investments, 17,878 affordable homes created, 294 miles of new and improved bike lanes, 882 new public transit vehicles, 5.2 million metric tons of GHG emissions avoided, and countless people served through workforce development and anti-displacement programming. And this does not even count the projects that are being awarded today. And we know firsthand that everyone involved in this program has the best of intentions to make California a more equitable, affordable, and sustainable place for all. Because of this, we look forward to continuing to work with all stakeholders, including applicants, advocates, and the dedicated staff at the agencies to continue to strengthen and streamline the program so it can achieve its goals in all communities across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Ellen Morris, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Morris. I'm Director of Development with Eden Housing, and I'd like to comment on the residences at Liberation Park, which is one of the projects that was on the final recommendation list last week, but was removed for on the list posted 2 days ago. Eden, if you're not familiar, is one of California's oldest and most experienced nonprofit affordable housing developers. We've been around for 55 years. And in that 55 years, we've applied for state funding a couple of times, including probably every ASIC round that we've had. And with that experience, we know how incredibly complicated it is to apply for these programs, for staff to review them on a tight timeline. But we also know that when that final recommendation list gets posted, it's time to celebrate. And it's very exciting for a project to be on that list. So last week, our team, in partnership with the City of Oakland and with the Black Cultural Zone, CDC, we celebrated. This project is in Deep East Oakland. It's an incredibly important project, not just for Eden, but for the BCZ and the City of Oakland. And there are others here who will speak on that. But it'll deliver 119 units of affordable housing, in addition to unlocking $100 million of philanthropic money for the neighborhood, as well as a market hall and cultural hub. So normally we know that there's always a project that has to be below the line, and we'll dust ourselves off, reapply next year, put in a good application. But this project deserves to stay on their final recommendation list. We were on it. If we don't get funded this year, the earliest we can see this project break ground is 2027, and there, a lot will be lost in the meantime. So we're here to advocate for the project, to answer questions about it, and to hopefully reconsider that list. Thanks.
Thank you. Lee Hansen, you're up next. Jamie Parks, Yvonne Chan, and Ali Gaylord, can you please line up behind the podium? Thank you.
Thank you. And good afternoon. My name is Lee Hansen. I am the Oakland Mayor's Chief of Staff, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I first want to start with thanking particularly staff, but also the Commission for the hard work in supporting this program. It's critical to the work that we do on the ground. And I appreciate your openness to hearing our thoughts regarding the funding for the Liberation Park project. As we just discussed last week, staff did recommend our project be fully funded at $44 million. The subsequent adjustments to the scoring process over the last week have since resulted in a $0 award for this project, despite the fact that our high score remained the same. And so I'm really here today to impress upon you the importance of this project to our community and to Deep East Oakland, and a request for your support in resolving this matter. My technical colleagues will speak more to the details of this project, but it is a significant affordable housing and transit anchor project in the $100 million Rise East initiative, which is really a very transformational project in the heart of Deep East Oakland, which is one of our most historically impacted Black neighborhoods. Without this award today and within this round, it won't be possible for this project to proceed, which not only jeopardizes our capacity to draw down the $100 million match for the Rise East project, but also delays and likely prevents this project from seeking our own local Measure U funding and SIDLAC in the spring. So our specific request to the Commission today is to vote today to forward commit $44 million towards the Liberation Park project from next year's allocation. We'd love to work in partnership with you and staff to fund this project while also simultaneously meeting your obligations to the other awardees. And we're absolutely willing to be flexible and creative, and we look forward to working with you to resolve these issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Up next, Jamie Parks.
Good afternoon, members of the council. Jamie Parks, Assistant Director with the Oakland Department of Transportation. And like many of my colleagues, I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Liberation Park project and ask that the council restore the project to the list of recommended funding projects. With my role at the Department of Transportation, I'm here to speak specifically on the infrastructure components of the project, which are substantial. Like many American cities, Oakland's geography is defined by divisions. The hills and the flats, as they're known, are symbols of economic and racial segregation that have persisted for decades. And they're not only symbols, there are physical barriers that we have installed to reinforce that division. Specifically, the 580 freeway and MacArthur Boulevard that parallels it are high-speed, dangerous facilities that cut through East Oakland, and they were intentionally located and designed to divide rather than connect. This project, the Liberation Park, the infrastructure component is critical to help us repair those harms and fully connect the Liberation Park housing development and the surrounding neighborhood with the jobs, the services, and transit that are located just on the other side of the freeway. It's a perfect fit for the HSC program, demonstrating the connection between affordable housing and the surrounding transportation. And the project will reconstruct MacArthur Boulevard, a high entry corridor with protected bike lanes and pedestrian safety improvements to connect, again, to the services just across the freeway. In short, it's a critical project to repair the harms of our society's past infrastructure decisions. And to be clear, it's a project that Oakland can't afford without outside grant funding, which is why I'm here today, to ask that the council reconsider the decision. We appreciate your work and the difficulty of just making funding decisions, but we're committed to working with the council to find a solution to allow Liberation Park to move forward without delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Yvonne Chen. Up next, Ali Gaylord.
Good afternoon, council members. I am Ali Gaylord. I'm the Deputy Director of the Oakland Housing and Community Development Department. The City of Oakland requests the restoration of the $44 million funding recommendation for Liberation Park. Liberation Park will provide deeply affordable housing in the historically underserved neighborhood of East Oakland. 119 units of affordable housing reserved for households earning between 20 and 60% of area median income, including 25% of those units who will be targeted for homeless or at risk of homeless. The application also includes funding for transportation improvements that my colleague Jamie just spoke about, and the development of 30,000 square feet of retail space to bring jobs to where folks live. This development scored well on the merits of the program and was recommended for funding and would have been funded today, but for the rescoring of the applications. This housing and transportation improvement project is robustly supported by the community and by the City of Oakland. The housing is desperately needed. The City Housing and Community Development Department has already committed over $9 million of catalytic infill infrastructure funding to Liberation Park. The AHCSC funding is absolutely needed to move this important development forward and to meet the timeliness deadlines under the IIGC program. This development will need to apply for 4% tax credits in the first round next year in order to meet those deadlines. We request that the funding recommendation be restored to the project to avoid lengthy and costly project delays. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move over to virtual public comment. For our virtual commenters, when you hear your name, please raise your hand in Zoom. You can do this by clicking the raise hand function under the participants menu, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom platform, or by pressing *9 if you are joining us by phone. Our first virtual public commenter is Carolyn Johnson. Carolyn Johnson, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. My name is Carolyn Johnson, or CJ. I am the CEO of the Black Cultural Zone Community Development Corporation. We are the co-developer of this project with Eden Housing. And to be clear, this project, which was recommended for funding, and subsequently on the 20th, we saw the list and it was rescored, or Our score never changed, but the rescoring led to us no longer being approved for funding. What I can say is that the Black Cultural Zone, CDC, we're an emerging developer partnering with groups like Eden Housing and others to bring necessary housing to East Oakland. There is no other project like this in East Oakland. But I will say that there are many viable, valuable projects that you all had to sift through, and we were delighted to see that we had been selected and heartbroken to see that something had changed. Our score did not change, the importance does not change, but we are no longer eligible. The impact of that change has reverberations beyond just this project. Our adjacent market hall of 30,000 square feet, because we're building neighborhoods in East Oakland for the first time in a long time, cannot proceed if this project doesn't proceed. And you've heard earlier that the proceeding of this project will be significantly delayed, if not undone, because we are not able to move forward with the layering of other financing that is necessary. But in addition, this project, Liberation Park, being funded with $100 million also from the Blue Meridian Rise East project, a never before seen kind of investment in East Oakland. This is the anchor project for the Rise East plan. And the reverberations of this not moving forward, being delayed 1, 2, or 3 years, the increase in costs, the moving on towards other things will be a major blow to the Rise East project. But more importantly, the collaborative has worked on this project since 2010. And it's something that we put into our application heavily to make sure that we were able to be eligible for this and got the scoring necessary, and things changed. And I'm asking for your consideration to reverse that decision and move forward with the commitment so that we can move forward with this project.
Thank you. Our next virtual public commenter is Charles Loveman. Are you online? Charles, you may begin your public comment when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members and staff of the Strategic Growth Council. My name is Charles Loveman. I'm the Executive Director of Heritage Housing Partners. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. HHP is a nonprofit affordable housing developer providing first-time home ownership opportunities for low, moderate, and middle-income home buyers. We believe we have the distinction of being only the second homeownership winner of an ASIC grant, which we did in round 6. And that was very, very challenging. The ASIC application is heavily skewed towards multifamily rental housing to the detriment of ownership projects. As you may know, Assembly Bill 1095 was passed in 2021 to evidence the legislature's intent that affordable ownership projects receive equitable treatment as compared to affordable rental projects for the funding of state housing programs. In fact, in that legislation, the ASIC program was specifically called out for being required to provide equitable treatment. We believe more work needs to be done to implement this intent, and ASIC should be a vehicle for that instead of an impediment. In this most recent ASIC round 8, we applied for funding for a 140-unit mixed income for sale housing project with 88 restricted units. It was a very challenging process that required appeals based on a misunderstanding of how for sale housing works. Fortunately, we were successful on those appeals, and we appreciate the willingness of the HCD and SGC to cooperate with us in that regard. I'm here before you today in support of our request for a formal inquiry regarding the treatment of our application as it relates to what we believe was the arbitrary and misplaced reduction in the number of vans in our application. We believe that reduction was supported by the facts and circumstances, and we submitted a letter to that effect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next virtual public commenter is Matt Lewis. Matt Lewis, you may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Lewis, Principal Property Development Officer with BART, and I'm speaking in support of adopting the staff recommendations. The ASIC program is critical to advancing transitory development on BART-owned land next to our stations. We appreciate having 2 of our TOD projects being recommended for awards this round. Our projects are ready to move forward, and this funding will enable them to break ground in the coming year. So these awards are urgently needed, and for this reason, we urge the council to approve staff's recommendation today. So thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Our next virtual commenter is Armin Nashat. Armin, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Armin Nashat. I'm the Deputy Director of Affordable Housing Production for the Office of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. And we just want to express our deep appreciation for these 3 awards in the city of Los Angeles for round 8. This funding will not only result in 337 units of restricted affordable housing, but will also reduce over 66,000 metric tons of GHG emissions, which wouldn't be possible without the AHSC program. These awards will allow critical projects such as the Jordan Downs redevelopment effort to move forward and will build out our local infrastructure in an equitable and sustainable fashion. We just deeply appreciate our city's longstanding partnership with the Strategic Growth Council, and we look forward to continuing this collaboration in future rounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next virtual commenter is Doug Menges. Doug, you may begin when you're ready.
Sorry,
Doug,
now.
can you hear us?
How about now?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. My name is Doug Menges. I'm the Executive Director of Many Mansions. Many Mansions has been around for 45 years in California. Our project, Aspire, was the other project where we were on the prelim approved list and removed from the final list. And I'm here to appeal. I understand, I truly understand that mistakes, certainly math mistakes, can happen. But I would need you to understand that based on the prelim awards and the back and forth that occurred before that, that we worked really hard to turn around a 4% tax credit application that was ready to go and that would be ready to go by this deadline. We were ready. We were excited to be what we thought awarded, as was the city of Oxnard. The city of Oxnard has already committed over $1 million to this project. So I would like consideration to either approve this project like Eden is asking for, or a forward commitment for the next round. Overall, I'd have to say it's been a little frustrating with the we were approved and not approved, and then the post-deadline change on the inclusion and then non-inclusion of the CalVans. But we're still excited. We're still committed to the project. We like ASIC. We received a previous award a couple rounds ago. We did nothing wrong in this. We did everything right. This is a great project supported by the city, and I would like your consideration to put it back on the final approved list. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 6 more virtual public comments. Our next virtual commenter is Galen Dobbins. Galen, you may begin when you're ready. Galen, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here now. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Galen Dobbins, and I'm a policy analyst with the California Coalition for Rural Housing, also known as CCRH. I'd first like to thank the council and staff for their considerable time and efforts on these very important programs. CCRH is a statewide affordable housing coalition that uses research, TA, and advocacy to make the case for affordable housing across the state, specifically for rural, tribal, and farm worker communities. CCRH was involved in the creation of ASIC from the very start as part of the cross-sector coalition that successfully advocated to fund affordable housing with cap-and-trade proceeds. We also advocated for the 10% rural set-aside leading up to round 2, and we have served as a TA provider for ASIC applicants since round 2 in 2016. We have a long history of championing this program and working to improve it in partnership with SGC. And we are pleased that SGC staff has taken care to make changes to the guidelines that continue to increase access to this program for the communities that need it most. During round 8, we worked closely with 7 potential applicants during the capacity building phase and with 3 RIPA applicants during the direct technical assistance phase. During the application review and scoring, reviewers removed significant transportation scoping elements from applications, reducing the CalVan scope for 6 RIPA and ICP projects by 90%. In the case of one rural project, this meant a decrease from 40 vans down to 4. Now, our TA experience allows us to speak with direct knowledge of the amount of work that goes into an application and the impact that the scoping changes will have on the applicants and their communities. These scope changes were made outside the guidelines and NOPA process and were not done before applications were submitted. Additionally, the changes to scope were not publicly notified and instead occurred only via the individual threshold and scope letters to specific applicants. This drastically affects rural, tribal, farm worker communities when it comes to CalVans. And I'd like to thank the council again, and we look forward to working with you to address these equitably for future funding rounds.
Thank you. Our next virtual commenter is Ileana Chavez. Ileana, you may begin when you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, Council. I'm Ileana Chavez. I'm the Director of Tribal Programs, also from CCRH. We've been providing technical assistance to tribes since round 5 to ASIC, and we just want to thank SGC, who has been a strong champion in pushing forward equity for tribes, as well as upholding government-to-government relationships with tribes throughout California. I mean, as mentioned before by previous commentators, ASIC is a strong program and many are looking towards it to meet their housing needs in various forms. And as TA providers who are working directly with tribal governments, we want more tribes to have access to ASIC. But during the last round, there was many obstacles in front presented to tribes that ultimately led to no tribal submission, as was explained by Ms. Amar Sid. And even though there have been slight modifications to current ASIC guidelines, they still do not fully reflect tribal realities and nonetheless tribal law. And so we ultimately want to create more access for tribes to ASIC, but that will take a different approach on how we do equity in ASIC. And until we have a tribally fitting path identified, ASIC guidelines will have to work for tribes. And so as TA providers that have worked collaboratively for many, many years with SGC, we're here to work to continue that ongoing partnership and make sure that there are more tribes aware and access and submit applications to ASIC. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next virtual commenter is Stephanie Montes. Stephanie, you may begin when you're ready.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Montes, and I am a project manager apprentice with the Avanzando San Isidro Affordable Housing Project at Casa Familiar. Casa Familiar is a community development organization who has served our community for over 50 years. And we work diligently with Hiskey Development Corporation, who applied for this project. And on behalf of our entire team and community in San Isidro, we are overwhelmed with joy to have been awarded ASIC funds for our project. Not only is this an opportunity to provide housing and sustainable resources for healthy communities, but this has truly been a testimony of making things possible through collaboration and engagement for an innovative project that is bridging a long-lasting and holistic approach to projects here in San Isidro that have the lens of climate resiliency. We are so grateful for the support to invest in the well-being of our community, and we thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next virtual commenter is Nick Wilder. Nick, you may begin when you're ready. We'll be moving over to Brian Elsey. Brian Elsey, may you raise your hand? Brian, you can begin your comment when you're ready.
Yes, this is Brian Elsey. I'm part of the development team on the 712 Seagaze project that was highlighted with the Prime Company. And I just wanted to say thank you to the council and all the ASIC funding team for awarding our project. We think this is truly a dynamic project. Just the location where it's at, it's west of the 5 in downtown Oceanside, literally 5 blocks from the beach there. It's a great transit-oriented site, and we're just thrilled to be a part of the ASIC funding and that we can bring desperately needed affordable housing here to a community in Oceanside that's rapidly gentrifying and losing so much affordable housing. And so I'm just want to say thank you from the entire development team. So thank you for allowing us to build this project.
Thank you. Our final virtual public comment is Emily Ware. Emily, you may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's always a pleasure and an honor to work with SGC staff and HCD staff on an ASIC application. I would simply advocate that if any forward commitments are made today, that they be counted towards the geographic and other equity distribution goals in the next NOFA. I know these goals are highly discussed, as we've seen here today, and I would simply hope that the next NOFA remain equitably distributed if portions of those funds are allocated here today. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment for this item. I will hand it back to you, Chair.
Great. Thank you. Before we move on to council discussion, I would like to ask staff to elaborate a bit more and provide context on some of the issues that came up process. I just want to also say to the project's Liberation Park, on behalf of the staff and council, so sorry for this mishap. I think being on the other side in my earlier career, I can understand how devastating it is to elect it and then 2 days later hear that because of fakes or other reasons you are not selected. But also, I think some of you acknowledged how a difficult process this is for staff. And so we want to understand, what went on, and also would like to ask staff to see what options council. So provide us some context before we have our discussion. That would be really, really helpful.
Happy to do so. And, we've kind of gone through a lot of different iterations and information in the last 2 weeks. And I really want to commend the work of staff in being responsive to a lot of different requests for information. And this is a conversation that we're prepared to have. And so we're gonna do it. I want to ask Marcid to take us through some of the issues around the miscalculation and scoring issues and kind of some of the timeline for that.
Yeah, happy to discuss some of that. So in the process of the review process, we have an appeals where applicants have an ability to appeal certain criteria. It is our staff review looking at those appeals to either move the appeal forward and have that project component keep going with that full score, or continue on with a rejection of that appeal and reduce the score. So appeal letters go out, and notices are documented if it is accepted or rejected. Where we're at with the scoring concerns and errors that were caught, once the initial recommendation of award list went out with the scores associated with it, some projects identified errors in that score based off of their calculations within the appeals process. Looking at one of the projects that sent in an inquiry, there was an identified score with the greenhouse gas reduction score. So that appeal process was actually missed. adding that project back in and with the full score moving forward of 11 points, it does change and it's comparable across all of the scores and it changes multiple projects scores, dropping some of them down. That was the first challenge and error that was caught. In that process, somewhat connected to it, we identified another error. This was with a project that looked at their percentage of funds associated with transportation costs that should have been added back in. So if you have a particular transportation amount, it bumps up that cost of sustainable transportation investments. That equates to a certain score. That appeal was accepted. That score should have been addressed in the points, and the percentage should have also been bumped to increase that particular project. So that project does also increase in score. With those two errors identified, we did a re-review of all the appeals process, all of the scores to identify any additional errors. We did find with that percentage of increase of dollars associated with the transportation costs, there were projects that didn't have their score reduced at the time of the letter or the time of the recommendation of award. So some projects actually had additional points where they should have had a lower points. So those three errors were identified. It did change the recommendation list. So we have El Cerrito Plaza that moves up. We had a Liberation Park that then had to drop off with the score. We had Palm Villa at State that had the GHG score rectified. That moves on. And then we also drop Aspire Apartments from the list. So 2 projects in and 2 projects out. With El Cerrito project coming on and with the projects that are associated with GHG scoring, you see some projects coming up. Liberation Park score did not change. They just so happened to drop off of the list based off of other project score increasing. Palm Villa score, that did increase. And again, we had to drop off the Aspire Apartments meeting that criteria. They no longer were in the recommendation for awards.
We have a slide kind of that highlights where in the process for the HSC scoring, and it's a HSC in brief process slide. And if we want to pull that up, it might be illustrative here in just helping to identify where we're talking about timing wise within the overall program. So I don't know if we have the ability to pull that up, Lisa, or not, but it's the procedural slide. And while we get that up, it can provide some context for it, which is that it was identified that each of the errors that were made were in response to or in the handling of an appeal. And so, thinking ahead for us, we view kind of the task before us is fairly clear at this point, but we also seek input from this council and will continue to seek input in the months ahead on ways to improve that process. But the appeal handling and how the outcomes of those appeals were then incorporated into final scores really did seem to be the primary issue that led there. We can stay on the scoring issue if we'd like. There were other issues raised in the public comment, and I want to leave it to this council as to how you handle issue by issue, or if you want to go through them all. But
I'll open it up for questions from council members, and then as necessary, we could actually use additional information. So with that, Secretary Moss, and then Chancellor Munoz, then Secretary Garcia.
Can you press? Is the green is not even working? Oh, apologies.
Thank you. Thank you again. Well, first of all, I want to just thank staff for responding to the public's comments. Thank you to the public for raising these important concerns to the council. It's always important to recognize that these are not just about projects. These are about people's lives. These are about communities that we all care about. And so I just want to first honor that and recognize that we all share that, staff, this council, as well as the public. I am deeply concerned about the two projects that have been left off the list. I recognize that this process is incredibly complex, which also I have some other thoughts about what we would like staff to maybe think about and bring back to us at a future meeting in terms of how we might streamline, improve some of these processes so that we don't get to a place of this circumstance where people are really affected by the work that we're doing on behalf of the state of California. So I wanted to just first of all figure out and maybe through the chair, what are our options in terms of ensuring that these projects on their merits, you've said that they have not changed in score, that they are ready. We have tax credit applications due next week. So I'm appealing to my colleagues, frankly, that we do need to move these projects forward. But I really want us to think about what our options are in terms of including the projects that were taken off the list. So wondering through the chair if staff could tell us what our options might be to include the two projects, the Liberation Park project, as well as the Aspire Oxnard project that really, as I think one of the public comments said, did nothing wrong, but are affected by the challenges that we've discussed.
Great. So with that, I would ask staff to respond to that and then go to, unless you have, I think we'll be more informed unless Chancellor Munoz, you have additional comments.
Well, I suppose I think my question might preempt the suggestion of what options we have. I mean, are we at the place immediately? We could arrive there where we're even considering options. I mean, to me, I think we need a little bit more clarity as to the handling of the appeal. The crux of the matter is that as a result of the handling of the appeal, certainly projects didn't lose points, some gained points. You have 45 applications, 38 of which were deemed viable, 21 of which were awarded. There were always going to be projects that did not receive support. So predicating, let's assume, as the secretary just said, we would love to award all 38, and all are meritorious, and all are helpful, and all address assumed. But you only have the funds for approximately 21. And so before we start talking about more than 21, maybe some clarification as to what materially was the issue of the handling of the appeal. Because one thing I heard in several of the speakers is as a result of the rescoring. Is it the result of arbitrary, capricious rescoring or the result of applying the score as required? Because in this instance, when it is in your favor, you want the absolute certainty of the score applied. In this instance, when it was finally correctly applied, there were two who had been noticed. Can't imagine how devastating it was to then learn, right, that there was a consequence. Let's better understand the handling of the appeal and what exactly that triggered.
I think Secretary Moss has a follow-up question.
I appreciate your comments, Chancellor. I would just say that we certainly recognize the incredible nature of all the projects that were considered. I think my biggest concern was that we noticed that these two were approved and then a week later they were not. So that is uniquely applicable to these projects, which is not the full list. And I recognize that there are going to be winners and losers. This is a competitive process, but I think it merits a conversation given that this was in fact communicated to these communities. They were banking on these resources. And again, I understand it'd be helpful to get some understanding of the appeals process, but just to clarify why these particular projects seem to be in.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
If I could just
well,
quickly.
the comment was to something. So I appreciate. I don't disagree. My understanding is, unless I'm wrong, were they determined to be eligible and recommended, or was a decision made that they were going to get this? Because if a decision was made, then that's a different issue.
But just for clarity of process, the decision is not made until the council votes on it.
So then the
technically-
comment of, and so we celebrated in the guarantee of this award. A recommendation is not the conferral of the award. So maybe, again, words are stubborn things. So I'm just trying to get some clarity. I'm not in disagreement with the direction that you are generally encouraging us to consider. I just want to, I think if we're going to consider that, we need to consider why we're looking at alternative approaches.
And if I may, I think that there's an opportunity for some clarity here, because I think one of the commenters did use the term or did describe the process of rectifying the appeals error as a determination of ineligibility. And I want to be really clear about that was not ever an outcome of the appeals error. No appeal that was processed and rescored modified an eligibility. What it did was it modified relative scoring to other projects. And so there's not a project that is on the recommended or not recommended list that's not potentially fundable. That's the third page of the recommended awards, which is projects that didn't pass threshold. That's an eligibility requirement, and that's where we weed out projects that we couldn't fund. We couldn't fund anyway. But the outcome of an appeals process is, well, at least this particular appeals process and the appeals process where errors occurred did not result in an ineligibility determination. So I want to just kind of clarify that's where this goes. So the projects that were subject to the errors that were made in the appeals determination are still, eligible for funding under the program. Now I want to kind of take this to a slightly different issue, which is that what we have to, assign and to allocate are funds that were deemed available when we announced the round 8 guidelines and provided that NOFA. And so we were working with a determined and finite amount of funding. So when we have a closed universe of funding when the staff is doing that scoring. And so a rescore says which projects are in and which projects are out. This is maybe oversimplification here, but and so by rescoring it, then it moves projects in and out. The projects are any project on page 1 or 2 of the list of that Excel are potentially fundable. We have to provide a compliant staff recommendation. And the staff recommendation we provided was compliant with statutory requirements and direction from this council on considerations like geographic distribution. So we provided a compliant recommendation that was below the amount of funding that we had technically available. To fund another project then gets us out of potentially compliance, but that's where we need to work through and talk about funding availability. So Chancellor, I think if that speaks to the outcome of the appeals not being an eligibility question, it's really about scoring and relative scoring and who's next, not an eligibility. And so we're not talking about, that was not the outcome here. So correcting a little bit of a misnomer that occurred in the public comment.
Well, again, I think among our roles is to provoke this kind of discussion. So even those, that are appealing right now were determined to be eligible and remain eligible. It's an issue of limited resources.
Secretary Garcia.
Thank you. So first, I want to just underscore something that Secretary Moss mentioned, which is that all of the applications are certainly worthy. And in particular, congrats to anyone who has made this list of recommended awards. I hope that the discussion doesn't eclipse how important that conversation is. And I think what you're hearing up here is that we have a healthy amount of consternation around what has taken place. and certainly appreciate the work that goes into reviewing these applications. And we all take our role very seriously in making these awards. I want to put a pin in the discussion that both the Chancellor and Secretary Moss raised, which is improvements in process. And I know you all put up the slide, which was helpful to see for a second, but I think that's kind of a longer conversation and thinking through what we may be able to refine in our process under the best of circumstances. You all know very well, these are complex scoring rubrics that are applied across several agencies. And so I have no doubt that there are things we can do to improve that process moving forward. I would recommend and request that the staff maybe come back to us after some interagency collaboration with a recommendation on improvements moving forward. And that frankly may require some of us to work within our agencies as well. I want to recognize that too. So I would love to hear how we can make those process improvements moving forward. And then going back to another, I think, request that Secretary Moss made to understand what our options are. I think we also pride ourselves on this council in being flexible with how we can use funds to address areas that are unique to these programs. And I think we take that flexibility again seriously, but would really like to understand whether we do have options to consider pulling back Aspire and Liberation Park potentially, and thinking through what that looks like.
So I think it's helpful at a point, and I fully agree with everything you've said, particularly on the process improvements. And I think turning into something of a truism in government, which is sometimes how we do it, is as important as what we do. Here, there's some pretty clear what we need to do, but we also need to really consider how we do that, who's at the table, how we're engaging our interagency partners, and we're responsive to our statutory obligations about coordination. Cal EPA is deeply at our table for the development of this program. HCD and BCSH are incredible partners for this work. So we need to, really think about how we bring that forward and engage it. Totally take the direction, welcome additional comment from this council about what that looks like, and bring that forward at a different date. Totally in agreement there. As far as what's possible and what we can do, I think want to kind of also help define the issue statement a little bit, because what's possible is also a reflection of what the problem that we're trying to solve for is. And when we've looked at bringing potentially those two projects back in, what that would take, we need to discuss a couple more issues that we need to get on along the way. So Amar, if you would not mind covering in more detail some of that scenario planning that we've done going into this. Let's try.
Lisa, if you can try to put that slide back up, that might be helpful also.
That would be the different scenarios and not the process snake.
Yeah. Scenario slide. Okay, so when we're trying to make the compliant award recommendation, we make sure that we're meeting all of our statutory goals, our priorities in this space. When we came up with our rectified recommended amount, we could not put in at the time the Liberation Park project solely based off of our statutory requirements to meet DAC benefit, right? So when we add in Resident Liberation Park, as you can see here, it's the second line, we are out of DAC compliant. So for AHSC, as a reminder, 50% of these funds have to be in and benefiting disadvantaged communities. So that is essentially one of the concerns here. We're also oversubscribed, not having additional funds with what we have identified for the NOFA and any disencumbered funds at the time of this recommendation for award. Adding Aspire also in could bring us to DAC compliance. However, again, we are over our current subscription on the program by $76+ million. We do meet that requirement by adding Aspire in. Where you see the third line, there's 946 Long Beach project, which is a DAC project. That project scores higher than Aspire. So what does it look like if we are bringing in a project that does meet the requirement to get us to our recommendation and be a compliant list? if we're bypassing an eligible project to meet that requirement. Those are some of the concerns that we have in this space. So here's the scenarios that we laid out. RLP, Resident Liberation Park, added in non-compliant for the award recommendation, also oversubscribed, adding in recommendation and Long Beach 946. We do meet our DAC requirement, still oversubscribed. Adding in Aspire, we bypass the Long Beach project. Adding in all three, we are compliant at 52% benefit for disadvantaged communities, but also oversubscribed by about $104 million.
And just to be clear, the oversubscription would then mean taking from next year's award potentially, or where would that come from?
So right now we can look at pulling in additional opportunities from our auction proceeds. So for this round, auction proceeds are 22-23 year. We do have auction proceeds for 23-24, which would be the round 9. So we need to do some rectifying there. We have 4 auction proceeds. We still need to make sure that we have enough funds that are going to go to SALC, which is a 10% requirement. So going through our administrative process to see how much we have, but we essentially have those auction proceeds. How we bring that in, I think maybe looking at our NOFA and looking at some of the requirements through requirements for that citation memo and expenditure record on how we identified these rounds to move forward. And then also looking at potential for disencumbered funds. So when we announced the NOFA in January, we did have 2 projects that disencumbered after that amount. So it did give us a bump, and that's how we got to the 685 amount. We have identified another project that had disencumbered, so there's still a little bit more, still not enough to cover any one of these options in this space. So there is an opportunity to continue to look at disencumbered funds and look at what it means to bring in additional funds from a future round.
And if I might just add on that, the cap and trade auction proceeds for 23-24 are something that SGC has realized and then distributes to partner agencies for administration, but has realized up to this point. The disencumbered funds sit with HCD and our partners over there. So that would require that coordination and ensuring that both funds are available and identifying equitable distribution as between the agencies for that. There are also really key features of that disencumbrance pot that might make it more or less suitable to rely on for this. So just want to put that in there, but it's not something SGC can do alone, but the program can do with direction from this council.
So that was very helpful. And I really appreciate our council members as well and the perspectives that you're bringing, really scrutinizing this, but also asking, the options. And in the way I'm hearing it is we all agree these are eligible projects, right? There's no question about that. I think we'll all agree if they made this list, they're worth funding if there's no unlimited funding available. And what I'm also hearing is there's a possibility that we can identify funds. Am I correct? If this is, again, that's not only within ours, but with our agencies' coordination, right?
Yes.
And here's where I come from in terms of the very specific issue. We all agree we have urgency around providing affordable housing. We have urgency around addressing climate change. We also, with the administration, we've had a lot of focus about, we have a very short window to address all of these issues. And where I lean towards is, process is absolutely important, but we need to address that further. But in the current context and the issues that have been raised, where I come down to is we should make every effort possible to get more eligible projects funded, again, within the confines of the statute and our own sort of policy objectives. So again, when I'm hearing from staff, my sense is we should do everything we can to address the current problem. Process, we could deal with it further down. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Deputy Secretary Musa. Munoz. Oh, sorry. And then Nicole, sorry, I missed.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again, staff, and for everyone who showed up today. As someone who has spent many of my own years working deeply on this program, about a decade ago, I was the program manager for the HSC program and spent several years running the program. I can speak to the complexities and the challenges that come with this program, but also the great opportunity that we have. I mean, this program, I think, is really a shining star here at the state in terms of the communities we get to touch, the investments we get to do, the reason we're all gathered here today, and the fact that there's so much attention to make sure we get these awards right is because this is a critical source of affordable housing that we have here in the state of California, our largest source of such funding, and one that funds a lot of amazing projects. I don't want that to get lost in these conversations today. I think it's really important to remember that as we discuss this. But I just wanted to say, in terms of as we look to rectify the issues and acknowledge the fact that there was a mistake made here and that communities were given what now looks like false hope in terms of awards that they expected to get, that we don't create other disparities or issues as we do so. So just wanted to add that as we look at the options, if we were to consider them, that we don't skip any project down the list as we do that, because favoring folks who were left off, but then creating an issue where we're skipping others down the line to do so, I think creates other inequities. So just in terms of the scenarios here, just wanted to say that's what gives me a little bit of discomfort around the one with just the two projects here, and not the I believe it's the Long Beach project that is in between the two. So wanted to add that. And then, as we're discussing the overall options here, Executive Director, you mentioned that there were other issues raised as well in the comments. So wanted to make sure we have the whole picture before we go any further in terms of this discussion, and particularly ask if staff wouldn't mind addressing the Calvans issue that came up earlier in terms of some of the background there, so the council has kind of a full picture before we move any further with making decisions.
Councilor Munoz and Nicole.
Okay, well, this actually dovetails nicely with the Secretary's comment. Mechanical question. Mar, you said there could be some disencumbered funds that were discovered and the auction proceeds. Do we have an idea of what that could be number-wise, what the unencumbered total? Are there other pots of money? Because if we consider the possibility of this scenario, we know what this number could be. So do we know what amount could be theoretically rescued, disencumbered, et cetera, that would maybe be assigned to this, in which case any forward consideration would be a different number, allowing future applicants, more to apply for, right? So do we have a sense of the number? And if the answer is we don't, then that's okay too.
If I might take this one, we've been in close coordination with our colleagues at HCD on this issue. And I'll say that there are some complexities of disencumbering funds that lend itself to be not a particularly static pot, because the nature of disencumbered funds are projects that leave previously funded projects. So that number is always changing. Issues are, as projects move through their funding and cycle, they identify that we actually maybe didn't need this much, and so they send some number of dollars back. We know that approximately a week ago that there was support for, there was financial ability to support an award upwards of 720 to do that. So we have some sense of where that number is. But I think that what would be vital is in any action that this council takes, providing HCD staff and SGC staff flexibility, because of the uncertainty and the changing nature of particularly the disencumbrance number. Now, to speak to the cap and trade auction revenue number, Amar was 100% on that. We know that approximately 900 million have been realized through those cap and trade auction revenues. However, what we don't know is what would be left over after all the administrative steps that we have to take. It's not a very exciting answer, I acknowledge that, but we have to take administrative steps to make sure that SALC and all the great work that that program does is funded with 10% of its reserves. We have to make sure that our partners are made whole so that they can continue to have their great staff contribute to the program. So we pay for the contributions of TA partners and of other departmental staff. So we know the sum total, or generally we have an estimate of the sum total at this point, and it's a significant amount. However, what we don't know is what we would come to this council with in around 9 NOFA. The estimates that our financial team has run would be somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, $650 million. But I just want to acknowledge the uncertainty to the council that we haven't fully run that scenario, but that round 9 NOFA was estimated to be around 650.
Public member Capretz, and then Secretary Wolford.
Thank you so much. I guess I'm getting less and less comfortable with all of these permutations and configurations because every answer gets more complicated. And I'm just concerned about the integrity of the program, to be honest. I think I can only imagine some of the other applicants that maybe are just a little bit farther down the list, wondering if their potential future money in the next round is being taken just, out of nowhere to correct a mistake. So I'm not saying I have a solid point of view at this point, but I do find there's just something inside me that's saying, I don't know, do two wrongs make a right? I'm not sure. Like, I just want to be aware. I just kind of want to echo the concern about we might be creating further inequities when trying to do the right thing, and what that could mean. Because while Chair Asefa, you had said like process concerns, we can address at a later date. The reality is I'm from San Diego, in Southern California, and we are still, through the existing process, not able to compete on the level playing field as the Bay Area. You just look at the raw numbers from like the past, I don't know how many rounds we've had, but we have not even achieved remotely any kind of parity based on any of the criteria in statutory or guideline criteria. So there are a lot of families who are in great need of affordable housing in San Diego and Orange County, for example, who are not even at the table because the developers don't compete in San Diego and Orange County because the guidelines automatically kick them out because of the guidelines as they exist. And so I'm just concerned about layer on top of layer of inequity and how we might be really, just making people believe like that we don't know what we're doing. And I guess I would also say that because we're trying to fix, admittedly very challenging situation and an unfortunate situation. And I'm so sorry for all the applicants who are going through this because it's not fair and right. So there's no easy answer here. But at the same time, I just don't want to make it worse and have other people suggest, that this program is no longer credible. And so these are just risks. I'm not saying they're set in stone. I just want to elevate them because I'm just getting less and less comfortable with how we're proceeding and how fast we're proceeding, and that all these numbers are being, thrown out after a 2-day conversation. And they're huge numbers because think about it, it's $100 million you're talking, or even more potentially. That's a ton of money. So again, I'm just thinking about all the families in Southern California that are not even able to compete because of the current process. So I just want to put that perspective out there, but thank you, Chair.
Great, Secretary Crawford and Adil.
Thanks, Chair. I would make a couple of observations. One is an obvious one that a couple people have made, which is, we have tremendous demand for affordable housing and we don't have resources that meet that demand. So whether it's Councilmember Capretz's, longstanding frustration about funding getting to Southern California, or, disappointment of those that don't get selected in these rounds. I just want to acknowledge that. Secondly, I want to acknowledge the good work that staff does. The fact is, billions of dollars have come through the Strategic Growth Council, and the vast majority of those decisions are a consensus-based process based on a very fastidious month-long, sometimes year-long process. So I want to make everybody, well, I want to build confidence that there's a very high level of confidence that we bring to this and the staff brings to that. That being said, I think one attribute of the Strategic Growth Council is we bring transparency and accountability to the decision-making process. And our agencies give away a lot of money through grant-making teams that really don't allow for this conversation. And that's, I think, just a reality of federal and state funding. And that's where we are different at the Strategic Growth Council. So from my perspective, when there's, a process error, we should acknowledge it. And then we should try to remedy it. And I think let's acknowledge that there's a process error here. I mean, we're looking at a slide that says the posted award amount, but actually we should really change our vocabulary, because an award is not made until this council makes a decision. But if we convey the expectation that an award has been made, and then a week later we say, actually, it was a provisional decision subject to change, it's not fair. And so, I concur with the Deputy Director Musavi that we should, ask and answer other questions that were raised in public comment. But actually, I am in favor of exploring the possibility of utilizing funding, including greenhouse gas reduction funds from the current year, to fund these 3 projects. And I think it would send a strong message that where, we make a process error, we can address it effectively. And I'm confident, based on your explanation, that these 3 projects remain strong projects and would meet the criteria as well as the intent of the program. So I'm not suggesting I'm not making a motion, but I just wanted to be transparent about where I sit at this, because I do think there's a remedy for this situation.
Secretary Musavi, or?
Sure, I'll go first. Thanks so much, Chair. And just to build off of some of that, just wanted to bring some historical context to this conversation to say that if this council were to choose to fund above the no fund, pull further down the list, it wouldn't be the first time we've done so on AHSC. I'm actually trying to get some information from staff in terms of where exactly that's happened. I think we've identified at least 2 other rounds where we've done that in the past. So, I think that is the beauty of the Strategic Growth Council. And to Secretary Crowfoot, when many of our other processes that are clearly done at a department or agency without a public board, you don't get this opportunity for a rich back and forth to really decide and make sure that we're using our dollars to the fullest capacity to build as much housing as we can right now to both remedy an error we made, but also really look at how we can move as much housing forward as soon as we can. So it would not be the first time this council has made a decision like that if we were to look to modify the staff recommendation to pull additional projects down from further below the staff recommended list.
Thanks for that context, Secretary Mott.
And I know staff are going to provide some of the feedback about the other public comment issues that we heard, but I wondered if you could speak specifically to the DAC score for the Liberation Park project, because for anyone who has been to East Oakland, who knows this project, it is really difficult for a layperson to understand why this would not meet the DAC score, which again, I think leads to Secretary Crowfoot and Garcia's questions about our process and how those things get scored. So just wanting to provide you all an opportunity to maybe explain to folk how that might have happened.
Yeah, for the disadvantaged communities within AHSC, this is, as a reminder, a California Climate Investments Program, part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And so it is part of our requirement to look at meeting the disadvantaged communities criteria. We utilized Cal Enviroscreen, most updated 4.0, to make sure that those projects that are identifying their location data are either in a DAC, in a low-income community, or in a DAC within a half mile of that particular DAC location. So for this particular project, it is not scored via CalEnviroscreen as a DAC, as meeting that percentage threshold that would say this is a disadvantaged community for that criteria. So when you look at the score for the location, I believe it scores around 65, which is moderately disadvantaged, not meeting the criteria that deems us as meeting the benefit for this particular program. So within that space, there are location data identifications that we have to utilize to make sure that we meet that criteria.
I just have a clarifying question.
Sure. Yes.
Can you just remind us, Amar, too? So not meeting the CalEnviroscreen criteria, but on income, so the 1550 criteria, does it not meet the low income community criteria either?
It does. However, for this program, the criteria is it a DAC, a disadvantaged community per CalEnviroscreen. So that is the criteria that we have to operate. There are criteria for low income communities that is a different score. So we need to meet the DAC criteria for this particular program. So two different things. SB 535 identifies what a disadvantaged community is. AB 1550 expands that for priority populations, which lists out low-income communities, spatial data, as well as the half-mile buffer around a particular DAC, which also has a benefit.
So was there someone else?
Chair, I think it may make sense, since a few of us have suggested just answering questions as it relates to other input during public comment. Is that okay?
Sure.
And for that, I think we can start with the CalVans issue and jump into that one. And Amar, if you want to go through that.
Yeah, sounds good. So with the CalVans decision, upon application review, there was some information that was provided across all the applicants. So when we were looking at all of our applicants, as a reminder, we are looking for accuracy. We're looking for the correct data within the application that would prove valid. And so generally, our program teams look and have identified multiple projects outside of this CalVans area where we reduced the scope and the score. For CalVans, there were 13 projects that had partnership coming in for a CalVans type of project. Where we've started finding some concerns were the ratio of CalVans and housing criteria. We could not necessarily pinpoint if the CalVans were actually going to be located and representing the residents of the development. So we couldn't identify if the service would be for the residents with the residents. We couldn't identify if there were available parking spaces or met the criteria for our ratio. And again, some of the other concerns in here were really on that service area credit. And through some of the appeals process, we could not then identify if that was accurate or not. So having multiple discussions with project teams, talking to CalVans, we made the decision to reduce the projects down by 90% of their request. This doesn't come lightly. When we looked back at past awards and seeing what projects were actually coming to fruition, it was less than 10%. And so we thought we could, hold 10% of the project moving forward instead of removing that project component altogether. For an example of some of the ratio concerns that we did see some projects that had, requested for 40 units of development that also had 40 vans associated with that project. So in that space, we couldn't identify again where the vans would be located in the service area that they would be providing.
So with that, not very clear on what options that we have in terms of actions today, the way I see it, one is we go with the recommendation of staff, or there's an option B that considers remedy. But are we ready to do that today is my question to staff.
I think with some of the guardrails and flexibility that I talked about earlier in allowing HCD staff and SGC staff to coordinate relative funding amounts that would be devoted to filling the delta that is represented by the amount over current column in the slide behind you, that a motion to move the staff recommendation and include projects from the left column, is something that could move all of the recommended projects and get the additional projects that were added on in the motion into both the necessary HCD review, which there may remain some level of financial feasibility that needs to be engaged by HCD for some of these, but that process does occur sometimes after award, so there is precedent for that as well. But a motion to direct or to award recommendations plus awards or additional projects, by the left, and we can have language up on the screen to guide that depending on which particular projects the council wishes to identify for additional funding. That answer your question, Chair?
Yeah, it does. The only other question that I have is there any implications of delay for other funds? Delay for the other additional ones?
I don't believe so. I think that by taking the action today, what is usual for these projects is that then SGC and our partners at HCD will issue a letter of award. I forget it's conditional award to the projects that then they take to those TCAC processes that they submit with that application. And that has been sufficient in the past, and we expect that would be sufficient to meet that August 29th deadline that we identified earlier.
That is the process that we're working through right now because of the short timeline of this award and the application for TCAC next week.
Public member Capretz. Yeah. Nicole, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to find the mute button. You'd think I'd know where that is right away by now. Is there a way to take two separate votes? Because I just remain uncomfortable with making a final decision about the potential of the additional awards. Given how fast this train is moving, is there a way to first take a motion on the staff recommendation and then have a separate motion? Because I do want, for sure, I want all those projects that are, we know with certainty fit all the criteria to move forward. I don't want to vote no. Does that make sense? I would appreciate two different votes is what I'm trying to say.
So there are a couple of different approaches that could be used in managing multiple motions. I want to actually ask, and I forgot to highlight earlier that we're being capably assisted today in the legal department by Doug Bojack, who formerly used to serve this council. But Doug is on the line, and if we could bring him up, I know that he's prepared to and has some information on motion practice that might be relevant to this discussion.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hey, Doug.
Hi. Yes, projects can be separated out in different, the council can address the awards in multiple motions if that makes it easier to process how you'd like to make awards. It'll just, we'll carefully work our way through multiple motions.
And then for those familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, there is also an opportunity for a motion to be made and an alternative motion to then be made, which would stack those votes in a slightly different order. But we're prepared to manage that process should you so choose.
So what I would recommend then is if anyone wants to make a motion, then we can discuss that. And then if there's an alternate motion, we can add that as well, right?
I had a question prior
Councilor
to
Wing,
your,
sure.
I had a question prior to your comment. Matt, you said that there's a precedent for sort of the notification of funds after the, right? And I think that would be helpful. I appreciate the secretary's comment about sort of adding that there's a precedent for what we're about to maybe consider. But then you said that there's a precedent. You know, my point is not the merit, but the resources, the finances, and to have a clear sense of what, you know, we're committing the agents into. But you're saying that there are in fact cases where, because you talked about the ambiguity, the trade, the cap and trade, the movement, right? But that there are instances where these awards are made without that sort of number being absolutely known.
So we did have notes from Kellis TA, Darwin Wasabi, who talked about some of the past experience with HSC rounds of awards. So round one, as a just some of a refresher here, it looks like there was an award for upwards of $130 million with language for conditional opportunities for future funds, which then became a substantiated award at a later date. So an award was made at one council meeting in June and then continued on to October with additional auction proceeds that were identified and allowed eligibility from that round one award list. So it became a supplemental award in that space. But I think that's
Okay.
just how, you know, past rounds have operated. This may be a little bit different.
Okay, with that, I'm sorry. Oh, Nicole, you have your hands up again?
Sorry, I was just going to make a motion, but if someone else has questions, of course, go first.
Please go ahead.
So I'll just start by moving the staff recommendation.
A motion, anyone, any second?
I would second that.
Secretary Crawford seconds that. Any discussion? I have one more question about two motions. Is there any difference? And maybe this is for Doug or the process. If you have two separate motions versus one motion that captures both options, is there any difference in outcome or no? I mean, in terms of timeline.
So I want to describe a little bit, and or Doug, if you want to jump in here, but there's the idea of a motion to amend. And so after one member makes a motion, that motion receives a second, which this motion has, another member could move to amend A's motion in a particular manner. If that motion receives a second, the motion to amend receives a second, then the council would debate on the amended motion. So then at that point, you would only be discussing whatever the amendment is. And the vote would occur first on the motion to amend the larger motion, and then a vote would be taken on the then amended motion. I believe Chancellor Munoz has some experience with this.
Yes. Secretary Moss.
I don't know what you said. What now? I think I want to amend the motion. Okay, great. Yeah. Right. I mean, I would like to amend the motion, amend the motion of the staff recommendation that's on the table to include the additional three projects that the staff have outlined in the presentation, that there are known resources for, and that staff will do their due diligence in partnership with the other member departments that review these applications to ensure that there are resources available for the three projects, given the identified sources that have been discussed.
I would second.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I would second that amended motion, reiterating the collaboration that will happen on the identification of funds and a report back to the council on that when you have concluded that, and also want to just remind of the process improvements that we will come back and discuss.
So we have an amended motion by Secretary Moss, second by Secretary Garcia. Any discussion?
Can I ask a clarifying question on that motion as to, and sorry to get really into the semantics, but is the motion as it stands a conditional addition of the three or an addition of the three with direction to staff to go identify funds? And to me, I guess the distinction is that will those three come back to the council or not? I guess maybe a question for staff in terms of what is the appropriate way to frame that in terms of conditionality versus not based on the funding situation?
I think as I interpret the condition subsequent that the secretary discussed, that the condition subsequent would be satisfied by sufficient funding identified by staff with guardrails on financial feasibility. Once that is determined by staff, the awards could then issue.
Thank you.
So it would not need to come back, and including the report back could just occur on the outcome of the subsequent staff action.
So just to clarify, we'd be giving conditional awards based on availability from the 2022-23 cap and trade funds, or just also including 23-24?
The condition subsequent would be related to the availability of 23-24 funds.
I guess I just feel compelled to voice a reservation about that. And I don't mean to blow up everything, but I think that some of these programs have gained a lot of success because of their predictability and people knowing that other rounds are coming. And that's partly because we can rely on GGRF and cap and trade post proceeds to exist and be there. And so I'm just seeing us kind of eat into that round 9 funding and seeing it as a little bit less like fairly competitive for projects that may have come forward in round 9. So I just wanted to put that out there. I feel like I can definitely easily support the staff recommendation and conditional approval of awards if we can find disencumbered funds, but I'm just not sure about moving into round 9 funds and want to hear what folks think about that.
So I have a process question and then a content question. My process question, and just to put this in layperson's terms, because we're throwing around a lot of state programs, but I think the question before us is, do we include or do we approve funding as it's available for these 3 projects, in addition to what staff is recommending? I'm supportive of that. The process question is, I think, Commission Member Capretz wanted the opportunity to demonstrate her support for those projects that were recommended by the staff report. And it sounds like she's uncomfortable supporting the additional 3. I'm open to essentially splitting the decision into 2, if that's appropriate from a process perspective to provide her that deference. But I just want to make clear, I do think it's important to fund these 3 projects. And I think, Deputy Secretary Jameson, I think you make a fair point that, the use of funding beyond what's disencumbered, what's essentially put back into the pot, the use of funds for, an additional greenhouse gas, a pot of funds that will be used for the next round does mean a slightly smaller pool of funding. But I would observe that I still think it's going to be a robust pool of funding for the next round based on the estimate provided today. And I think given this fairly extraordinary, process error that we've had, I think it's justified. So I just wanted to rationalize why I will be supporting the addition of the 3. And we can find the right legal language to do this so that it's subject to actually having the money.
Yeah, so my understanding of the process is we can vote on both motions, right? With the amended motion and then the first motion, which was just
The success of
recommendation.
the amended motion would obviate the need to vote on the, that would just be the motion and that would complete the item.
But could we not do two motions?
But we have two
Could
motions
we,
on the
could we
table.
vote on the staff recommendation and then make a further motion on the additional three with the
Or so you'd
contingency?
have to withdraw.
There's two issues that I'd like to address with that. Well, that I think need to be addressed. One, I will cover. One, I think Doug should cover. The first is a Roberts question. The Roberts question is, we're debating on the motion to amend at this point. So anything else would need to, any other steps would require the withdrawal of, and Alex, feel free, because I think that you know. I believe, I'll try it, but I believe that any other direction would require the withdrawal of both the amended and the original motion to then have a blank slate on which you could begin. The second issue, I think, speaks to the listing of action items, but let's refer it over to Alex, who is a Robert's Rules of Order consultant for many California counties.
So for the record, I have over 10 years of Robert's Rules experience, and I did the training for our staff recently. So a couple things I want to highlight to the council right now. You currently have a live motion. It is a motion to amend. You must take that one first. If you do not wish the amendment to pass, which is to fund the staff recommendation in addition to the three awards that were left out previously, if you wish to proceed with that, you would vote yes. And then after, presuming that whole motion passes with a majority of the council, you would then proceed to debate that to officially pass it and award those funds, given the caveats that Matt described earlier. If you do not wish at this time to consider the three additional awards and you would rather do it separately, or you just don't support funding those awards, you would vote no on the amendment motion. Does anyone have any questions regarding what these votes mean?
No, that was clear for me.
Like, just to make sure, so we'd have to take a vote regardless in order to have a blank slate. And we would take a vote on the amended motion, which would then implicate the main motion one way or another, unless if we wanted to go back and make a motion to separate.
If you wanted a motion to separate, you can either vote no on the amended motion, or the person, which was Secretary Moss, who made the amended motion, can rescind their motion.
So with that, Secretary Moss, you wanted.
Frank had his hand up.
Deputy Chair Cardenas. And then Member Capret.
I did have my hand up, and now I'd like to lower it with vigor because look, I will support whatever motion allows us to fund the additional three fantastic projects. So if we are deferring to Alex on this question, Alex, tell us how we get there.
You have two options. We can start from scratch completely, or if you, it sounds like council would like to take a vote funding the additional three projects in addition to staff recommendation. You would vote yes on this amended motion if that's what you would like to do. And then you would have your discussion again on the new amended motion and then vote yes if you wanted to award those funds. That's
So,
two votes.
Secretary Moss, I'm going to give you. Oh, Capret, sorry.
First of all, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. I appreciate you backing me up. I just want to please, I really would appreciate the opportunity to vote on a standalone motion on the staff recommendation. I think it's the right thing to do. I think this is a very uncomfortable situation. I think encumbering funds from the next round that lots of people across the state have had zero access to, zero voice in, is challenging the integrity of the program. And I just ask you to rescind this motion so we can go through just approving the staff recommendation and then taking a separate motion, and then it sounds like the majority wants to approve the 3 projects, that's fine. I'll respect, appreciate. But I just would like to be able to vote yes on the projects that I believe have, that are totally the right call at this moment in time. I would really appreciate that. I do not want to vote no on the amended motion. I would appreciate that opportunity.
So, and I appreciate your comments, Member Capretz. Just a clarifying question, maybe for Alex or Matt. Because there is only one action item on the agenda, and it is the motion we have in front of us, I am not willing to withdraw my motion if we are not able to introduce another action item to vote on a separate motion. So if we are able to separate, given that on our agenda, we had one action item to vote on, I would consider that. Otherwise, I'm not willing.
Secretary Moss, thank you for your inquiry. Yes, we can take 2 different actions as Doug described earlier. Even though it's not on the agenda, this is germane discussion. So the council is free to proceed how they wish. If you would like to rescind your motion, the motion would then be the original motion made by Public Member Capretz, or sorry, not Capretz, Representative Capretz, and then the council will be voting to pass the staff recommendation as is, and then a new motion may be introduced to do whatever you want with the other rewards.
Great. So with that, you asking Secretary Moss if you're going to withdraw.
I withdraw the amended motion.
Thank you.
And because your motion did get a second, I would recommend a second to your withdrawal, just so there's consent.
As having
Second.
seconded the motion, I second the withdrawal of said motion.
Seconded by Secretary
The motion on the floor is now the original motion made by Capretz, which is to approve the staff recommendation.
And seconded by Secretary Crawford. Any discussion on that?
No, but
Being none.
thank you, everybody. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Being none, Augustine, do you want to do a roll call?
Thank you. I will begin with you, Director Samasefa.
Yes.
Public Member Frank Cardenas.
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Virginia Jamieson.
Yes.
Secretary Yana Garcia.
Yes.
Secretary Tomiko Moss.
Aye.
Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz.
Aye.
Deputy Secretary Darwin Musavi.
Yes.
Chief Equity Officer Daniel Torres.
Yes.
Public Member Nicole Capretz.
Yes.
Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Now I'm going to ask if there's a second motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 3 projects that we've discussed with the caveats that we also discussed in the previous motion.
Second.
Okay, motion, second motion by Secretary Moss, seconded by Deputy Secretary Musavi.
Maybe for the sake of clarification, you want to include the caveats that you previously supplied in your previous motion, just so we can go back to the record on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Just for clarity, could you articulate the motion, or summarize the motion? So
I would recommend stating the motion in its entirety, please.
Sure. That staff do its due diligence around the, great. One moment. Okay. Additionally, I move that the council put forward the necessary funds from FY 2023-24 cap and trade revenues and/or disencumbered funds as available to make awards for the 3 additional projects: Residence at Liberation Park, 946 Linden, and Aspire Apartments. Thank you.
Do you still second that, Deputy Secretary?
I do.
Okay, we have a second motion. Any discussion on that? Being none, can we have a roll call?
Thank you. I will begin with you again, Director Samasefa.
Yes.
Public Member Frank Cardenas,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Virginia Jamieson,
Yes.
Secretary Yana Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Tomiko Mas,
Aye.
Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz,
Aye.
Deputy Secretary Dario Musavi,
Yes.
Chief Equity Officer Daniel Torres,
Yes.
Public Member Nicole Capretz,
No.
Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Yes.
Second motion passes with 9 in favor, 1 nay. Back to you,
Great.
Chair.
Thank you. And I will just echo Secretary Crawford's comments much earlier, which is, that we don't lose sight of how important these programs are, but also how important the uniqueness of this body is. I don't want us to lose sight as well, whether it's the 3 projects or the initial proposed, the ones that made the list, literally respond to urgent needs, not only on affordable housing, but also on our climate goals, and in specifically climate goals where we reduce greenhouse gas in areas that are most impacted by climate and pollution. So we can't lose sight of how remarkable it is that the actions that we've taken and the importance of this program. So thank you, my council members and staff, for this incredible work, and most importantly, the project sponsors for this incredibly transformative project. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that. So with that, we get to the next.
Chair, if we're
Yes.
still on the item, can I make one more comment, or do we have the ability to do that?
Sure.
Just, I don't think this necessarily needs a motion, but just wanted to echo the ask of the council for staff to come back in October with a reflection on the program at large.
Great. So staff has gotten that direction. So now we will go to item number 7. This is a discussion of SGC's interagency racial equity update. And I'll again ask Matt and team to present the panel to us.
Well, how fitting as a representation of the broad work that SGC does to move from that item to this wonderful discussion and update on racial equity across state government. And I'm honored to hand it to Hoife Mak, who's our Deputy Director of Equity and Government Transformation, for introduction of these esteemed speakers and to hear from the council on their progress on racial equity. Faye?
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, Council. Glad to be here to introduce the Interagency Racial Equity Update. This comes from our 2020 Racial Equity Resolution, which stipulates that at least 2 of our council meetings focus on racial equity within state government. This also created the Racial Equity Working Group, which helped to put together our member agency updates. We'll see later. Next slide, please. Well, I'd like to start with first our SGC racial equity updates. We have continued to implement our racial equity action plan. The full annual update on the racial equity action plan will come in the December council meeting. We've also continued to improve our communications around racial equity, including the launch of a new website which hosts all of our racial equity updates, and also the continued facilitation and maintenance of the racial equity resource hub. Across SGC's convenings and external facing events, the Catalyst Conference, and work with other state agencies, there's been a continued focus on increasing the representation of frontline communities, great accessibility, and outreach. Next slide, please. As part of the strategic plan, we've also continued to focus on racial equity. We've heard a little bit about the ongoing implementation and accomplishments for the first year in the last council meeting. Part of the operationalizing of racial equity within the strategic plan has looked like leveraging federal funding, increasing technical assistance around greater access for frontline communities, for greater resources and funding. In the coming year, we'll focus on a couple of key priorities for Council Priority 2, which is focused on the capacity building as an equity strategy. Next slide, please. The health and Policies Task Force convenes over 25 different departments, agencies, and offices at the intersection of public health and racial equity. This is facilitated by SGC in partnership with the State of Equity, the Public Health Institute, and the Department of Public Health. This facilitates 2 monthly working groups focused on grants and contract equity and equity within data and information systems, as well as the Safe and Equitable Communities Roundtable, which focuses on safe and violence-free environments. They were able to do a landscape analysis on state violence prevention initiatives this past year. Overall, the task force has focused on distributional equity, as well as engagement with communities of color and support to tribes. They were able to provide technical assistance and subject matter support to agencies this past year. Next slide, please. I'd also like to highlight our Capital Collaborative on Racial Equity, CORE, which is a capacity building training program on racial equity. This is facilitated by State of Equity and SGC as the state host. The 2023 to 24 learning cohort is happening now with 6 state entities enrolled through December, and the completion of the first inaugural transformative leadership cohort focused on BIPOC employees and community members included this past summer, and 14 state agencies were represented there. Overall, State of Equity has been able to support the Racial Equity Commission on the racial equity landscape analysis. So very excited to see the outcomes of that later this fall. And State of Equity is currently continuing to recruit for the 2025 core season. So encourage all the council members to remind their departments to take advantage of this training opportunity. Next slide. The working group has submitted a variety of different updates on racial equity and the accomplishments of last year across departments. The full written update can be found as Appendix A in Item 7 of the staff briefing. Some of the key themes can be seen in the slide here. Overall, departments are continuing to align with the Executive Order N1622 on equity. We're proud now to have the Racial Equity Commission up and running and contributing to our updates. Overall, departments are continuing to engage with community and provide technical assistance, aim to increase access to resources and services, particularly with an emphasis on frontline communities. Many agencies are continuing to develop and implement racial equity action plans, as well as equity-focused jobs, duties, and certifications, and many departments highlighted different staff being onboarded to those positions. Overall, there is a greater capacity to advance racial equity and belonging through participation in the staff trainings, the core program, and affinity groups. Language access was a huge theme across all the departments, with at least 6 different initiatives being expanded and established this past year. And data also has been a theme as well, with different metrics being used to identify the different need populations across the diverse set of programs and services in state. As new programs are being developed, racial equity and tribal engagement has been prioritized in that development and design of programs and investments. So with that, I'd like to turn over to the panel. Next slide. Their full bios are provided for you as printed in your council binder. So I'll just very briefly introduce them. We have Ana Bolaños, who is the Assistant Deputy Director of Program and Policy at the California Department of Public Health. She's also the Tribal Liaison and the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Institute Project Director. We have Geneva Thompson, who is the Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. And we have Naina Pope Harden, the Deputy Director of Equity and Tribal Affairs at the California Department of Transportation. So welcome to all of you. We'll transition to the next slide. Kick it off. So the first question is, how do you center racial equity in your work? What does intersectionality of race and other factors such as income or disability look like in your programs? And we'll pass it first to Ana to start.
You're 5 feet tall, everything has to come down even when you're sitting down. So I'm honored to be here today to discuss our essential work to advance racial equity across California, particularly within our health systems and public health initiatives. Our work has been evidence-based and rooted in research and landscape analysis data. which indicate that disproportionate health impacts of historically inappropriately served communities. I will share some innovative approaches, key accomplishments, and lessons learned in embedding racial equity into our work at CDPH. We focus on establishing sustainable practices that address immediate challenges and create long-term pathways for equitable health outcomes. To answer your question, California's commitment to racial equity is deeply rooted in acknowledging past injustices and taking actionable steps towards healing and transformation. One of our initiatives, it's called HEART, which is Health, Healing, Equity, Anti-Racism, Trauma-Responsive Transformation. We created a section which works to build a trauma-responsive and anti-racist organizational culture. We need to start internally in order to also do the work externally. So the HEART initiative is a significant part of CDPH's strategic map. It aims to become a learning, healing organization that develops our people. HEART encompasses the technical plans to become a healing, trauma-responsive, and anti-racist organization. The goals of HEART is to embed health and racial equity into all policies, procedures, and workplace culture, foster a workplace of psychological safety, develop internal staff capacity to advance racial and health equity externally. We have developed a central definition for intersectionality within our glossary of terms that teaches the principles of intersectionality within equity, diversity, and inclusion. And now we add belonging to that, training for all staff. We provide technical assistance to the centers, divisions, and offices within CDPH and how to think about intersectionality and how that impacts their clients, as well as how to present and interpret data that may reveal intersectional impacts that the program had not previously considered. Our community inclusion and partnerships section, which we refer to as CIPS, is another cornerstone of our strategy. It focuses on hiring individuals with lived experience and establishing advisory groups that bring community wisdom directly into our decision-making processes. The CIPS teams also have a rural and disability specialist and a housing and homelessness specialist. We approach this work with a racial equity lens, knowing that people who experience homelessness are disproportionately people of color. We also acknowledge that there are many racial and ethnic groups represented in disabled and rural communities and are intentional about reaching those communities. CIPS centers racial equity by hiring people with lived experience, expertise in racial equity. For example, Black, Tribal, Latino, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, just to name a few, to build partnerships and establishing advisory groups to center on lived experience and community wisdom for racial and ethnic groups disproportionately impacted by health equity. We have been successful just recently in establishing the first Tribal Health Equity Advisory Work Group. We've also established a Black Health Equity Advisory Work Group. We have a Community Health Advisory Work Group, and we are in the process of adding a few more. Now to Geneva.
Well, Osio, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Chair and members of the Strategic Growth Council for having us here today. It's a true honor to share a little bit about the work that we're doing at the California Natural Resources Agency in strengthening our partnership with California Native American tribes, as well as looking at how we can build our programs and our services to best represent and serve the communities of all Californians across the state. As introduced, my name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she, her pronouns, and very honored to serve as the first ever Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. And in my role at the agency is to take a hard look and review all of the programs, policies, practices that we have, not only at the executive level agency, but in partnership with our 27 departments, conservancies, and commissions underneath our agency umbrella to see how we can strengthen our partnerships with tribes with this goal of collaborative problem solving, understanding that California Native American tribes have been stewarding the lands, waters, resources of California since time immemorial, have deep place-based traditional ecological knowledges that are essential for the care and health of our lands and natural resources, and also knowing that they have been severely impacted by the historical wrongs committed against their tribes, against their communities by the state of California. And so the work that we are leading at the agency is to take a close understanding of our role in those historical wrongs, identify what barriers tribes are facing in accessing our current programs and policies and resources, and then working to remove those barriers in partnership with tribes. I'm sure as everyone here is aware of, Governor Newsom issued his formal apology on behalf of the state of California to California Native American tribes, acknowledging the state of California's role in those historical wrongs. And through the governor's leadership, we're excited here at the agency to think through how we shape our policies to address those historical wrongs. First is really thinking about how do we shift our tribal consultation policies away from the box checking, we send you one letter exercise to early, often, and meaningful tribal consultations. These consultations are essential not only for us to communicate with tribal governments, with tribal leaders on the programs and projects that we're leading across the agency, but it's also an important opportunity to understand tribes' priorities and what they would like to see for their nations, for their communities, and identify opportunities that we can partner and work together to advance those priorities and all of our shared priorities, addressing the wide variety of issues that we're all facing: climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and conservation needs of the state. And so when thinking about this racial equity question and the intersectionality of race and other factors, it's important to understand that California Native American tribes are in of themselves governments that have responsibilities and elected leaders to advance priorities for their communities. But it's also extremely important to understand that Indigenous identity is a factor in thinking about how do we serve all Californians across the state of California. And I'm so excited to see Deputy Secretary Schwartz joining us here today. She's a true partner in the equity work that we're doing at the agency and thinking about how our programs work to address inequities across the state of California. We are doing a deep analysis of language access needs that we have across our departments, understanding ways to provide language access to folks who primary language is not English. How do we ensure that people can engage and work and collaborate and understand the proceedings and programs that we have at the agency? We're also doing a review and looking at how we can ensure our employees across the agency feel safe and comfortable across all the work or all the departments that we have with the agency, whether that's identifying how we can support those with disabilities, how we can ensure folks feel safe and comfortable in their workspaces. And again, Deputy Secretary Schwartz and I have a lot of joy in putting together and working closely with employees across our departments in hosting Heritage Months, focused on particular identities, focused on particular experiences every month to ensure that there's programming, support, and conversations that our employees across the agency can have with each other to think about how we build safe communities through our departments, but then also have those external conversations with folks who might not work for the state of California to better understand diverse identities and experiences and how that relates to our environmental laws and policies. So it's been a wonderful couple of years in putting together these Heritage Months and connecting with folks on how do we have informed, collaborative, supportive conversations with this idea of people's identities and those intersectionalities. So excited to share what we're doing here at the agency, and I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Naila Pope-Hardin, I am the Deputy Director of Equity and Tribal Affairs at Caltrans. My office, and I was hired in April of 2024, so I apologize. I'm less practiced in all of the pomp and circumstance of our office, but I will do my best. I think just in that initial establishment of the office in April, Caltrans has been trying to show a recommitment to equity and tribal affairs as a standalone important issue in the department. We are working on telling the story. So some of the things that we are doing are we have established an interagency equity advisory committee. With this committee, we are working with CalSTA and the CTC, bringing together subject matter experts, folks with lived experience across the state of California to help inform some of our policies and practices. I also have, so that's one external body that we are working with. And then I also have the pleasure of having the NAC, the Native American Advisory Committee, also under my office. So with both of those bodies, we are showing and trying to show a commitment of having a pathway and a venue for those external voices to come in and be able to inform policy and procedures moving forward. And being with Caltrans, we love data too. And so we have our EQI, our Transportation Equity Index, that we unlined in March of 2024. And this index looks at priority communities. Let me pull up my notes for this one. I apologize. Don't want to get it wrong. With this, it looks at transportation priority communities. It measures traffic exposure, access to destinations, and puts that into a geospatial map where you can look at where projects actually hitting ground and what are the priority communities. Very similar to a CalEnviro screen, but this one has a more transportation focus. I think on, not in my wheelhouse, but other things that we're doing at Caltrans to advance equity are in our OCR. We have been doubling down and very intentional about ensuring that we are contracting with minority and woman-owned small businesses. In the last year, we have administered over $1 billion in grant funding to minority and woman-owned businesses. And we are in the middle of updating our strategic direction. One of the values that we're elevating is an equity proficient workforce. And we're also evaluating what does that mean and what type of trainings are necessary to make sure that the 20,000 plus employees workers at Caltrans are equity proficient and moving forward. Thank you.
Great. So excited to hear a little bit about what else that your agency is working on. So just at the next question, looking at the state framework for embedding racial equity, can you share a little bit about the best practices from your agency's work, as well as the areas of focus in the coming year?
Thank you. So just a few, you can imagine the Office of Health Equity and CDPH being the largest health department in the country. We do have a lot going on right now. So I'll just focus on just on a few of the focus areas. So we're structuring, institutionalizing, and normalizing racial and health equity, creating spaces for learning, for psychological safety. I mentioned that earlier to you. Collaboration, really, it's been so important to do the trauma responsive training. And we're really working at creating employee affinity groups, racial equity work groups that I discussed previously. And we've also embedded health equity liaisons. We've developed an equity toolbox, creating standardized equity tools to help programs embed racial and health equity. Community engagement is really vital to us. So community engagement should be early, often, and meaningful, involving community members who impact decisions as equal and indispensable partners. Really see them as our partners. Engagement should be culturally and linguistically appropriate, healing-centered, and trauma-informed. Engagement should be bi-directional, involving two-way communication between decision makers and community members. Engagement should go beyond information sharing and consultation, moving towards collaboration and deferring to communities. Equitable engagement should transform government practices and relationships with the communities and populations served. One of the other things that we're also doing at the Office of Health Equity is really looking and working with our public health administrative manual and seeing how we can make it easier for our community partners to apply for grants or contracts. How can we improve? And so we look at CDPH as a learning organization and continuous improving. So we're looking at our practices. And sometimes it goes a little bit beyond CDPH, but it doesn't deter us. We continue to do that and working collaboratively internally so we can address some of those barriers that our community partners are experiencing.
Wonder if I could just ask a question based on your remarks. I'm so excited that all of you are doing this work. It's really central to how we're going to transform outcomes in our communities for the better. Did you say you have health equity? What's their title?
So when CDPH was provided the funding just a few years ago for the future of public health, we established 9 positions throughout the department and their health equity liaisons. And so we determined that in order for us to really become a racial, anti-racist organization and embed health equity, racial equity within the department, we had to do this by having it across the department, not just be central to the Office of Health Equity, but really put it in the different centers, division, and offices. And then we requested for each center, division, and office to actually find their own funding to fund these health equity liaisons. And our goal is to really expand because there are several center divisions and offices beyond the 9, but this is definitely a beginning in embedding health equity within the department.
That's great. And maybe this is a question for you or anyone on the panel, but one of the things I think is most challenging is being able to, once you've sort of recognized that there are inequities either in your service provision or your funding programs or what have you, how do you change that? And then assess whether or not those disparities in communities are being reduced over time. And it feels like the next frontier to me in terms of racial equity outcomes. We first started disaggregating data, check. We recognize that racial equity is central to our work, check. But then how do we in fact transform that on the ground for reducing disparate impacts?
Well, I think if you think about it, right, we've been in this situation for hundreds of years. And it's going to take a minute, right, in order for us to transform and to become anti-racist and become equitable, right, in how we serve our communities. So it's going to take a little bit, but we look at that. We're working on at CDPH. We look at our objectives and key results, and every program, there are 400 programs in the department, are looking at that. How are we measuring things? What are our objectives, and how are we going to get there? And they're not set in stone. They're not forever. They can be for 6 months, and then we can readdress, right, and see how are we improving. I think it's about being transparent internally with each other, and being transparent with our community partners. And we walk that fine line. All of us here, we're community members first, and then we represent government. And so it's important to be that person when we stand in front of our community members and say that. We may not be able to do everything that needs to be done in order to transform our systems, but at least we're really making an effort, and we're doing it together collaboratively.
I really appreciate this question around best practices and areas of focus as it relates to embedding racial equity. And I think I'll take it, add to it of also how we're strengthening partnerships with tribes. And some of the work that we're doing at the agency is really having detailed goals to strive for. Knowing that those goals are going to have what those on the ground impacts are, right? And so understanding, like, we would like to see, X solution happen. How do we have numerical trackable goals and outcomes to see if the shifts that we're making in our programs are actually meeting those goals. And so in the tribal affairs space, I have broke down the tribal affairs work into 5 key categories to help us track and understand, are we reaching those goals of strengthening partnerships with tribes? And so the first one I've already highlighted a little bit, but I'll go into a bit more detail, is implementing a early, often, and meaningful tribal consultation policy. We are in the process of updating the California Natural Resources Agency's tribal consultation policy now to integrate those policy goals of early, often, and meaningful. We have been hearing from tribes pretty consistently that sending a letter does not constitute consultation, and that there needs to be more outreach, more moments of collaboration to actually meet that higher bar of meaningful consultation. And so through that, not only do we need to have an updated policy that institutionalizes this idea, but also having trainings and support for our staff who we're asking to represent us in these consultations, making sure they have the tools and the skills available so they can successfully implement these early, often, and meaningful consultations. It's also important to ensure that when we are setting timelines for our projects or the development of policies, we're building in adequate amount of time for tribes to be able to receive our request for consultation, review it, respond, and schedule a meeting. And we all know that governments move slow. That is true with tribal governments as well. And so it's important to know who your partners are, know what processes they have to follow internally, and then work collaboratively with them to schedule and work towards that early, often, and meaningful tribal consultation model. And then the second policy point that we're working hard to do across the agency is integrating tribal priorities into all of the work that we do. For too long, tribes have been pushed into a particular policy corner and not thought about in all of the work that we do across the agency. And so that is why it's extremely important to have, again, this early, often, and meaningful tribal consultation, because that's the only way you're going to learn the priorities of your partners. And when you know what the tribal councils are hoping to accomplish for their communities, you can work in partnership with tribal leaders to identify how policies can be changed and adjusted to meet their community's needs, to meet their priorities that the tribal councils are pursuing. Then the third policy area is funding those tribal priorities. Due to the historical wrongs that the state of California and others committed against tribes, a lot of tribes do not have resources available to them, whether that's land, natural resources, money. Those resources were explicitly taken from them in an attempt to destroy their governments and communities. And so because tribes have limited resources, if we are truly meaning to have those meaningful partnerships and collaboration with tribes, identifying funding to support their priorities is a great way for the agency, and I would say the state of California, to do that work. And so an example that I'm particularly proud of that we've been leading here at the California Natural Resources Agency is the establishment of the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program, which we had $100 million available to support tribes in their nature-based solutions work, with a strong emphasis around the acquiring of property for ancestral land return. And that's been such an exciting grant program. We made our awards couple months ago, and now working closely with tribes in pursuing those property transactions. Then the fourth policy area that we are leading here on the agency is how to advancing tribal access and co-management of our natural lands, public lands, and natural resources. We've been hearing from tribes that a lot of these lands contain sacred sites, important areas, and due to policies and programs in place, access to those areas is limited, if not fully barred. And so how do we evaluate our programs, build in measures to ensure tribal members, tribal governments have access to their important sites, to their natural resources. Then we're also looking at co-management. What are the policies we can put in place to ensure that tribal governments can sit at the table with our departments and develop the management plans together to ensure our shared priorities are advanced. State parks and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have been real thought leaders in this space and have developed MOUs, joint powers authorities, and other agreements with tribes to ensure that tribal access and co-management is being advanced. And then the fifth priority that we're leading across the Natural Resources Agency is that ancestral land return. We know that the big historical wrong that a lot of tribes are focused on is the forced removal of their lands and not having access to their ancestral territories. And so looking at ways that we can support ancestral land return, whether that's through the grant I just mentioned, or identifying state lands that are eligible to be returned back to tribal ownership and stewardship. And so those 5 policy areas are top of mind for me and working closely with the tribal affairs staff at our 27 departments, conservancies, and commissions to push on those 5 priority areas. And happy to answer any questions or share more insight.
Great.
Thank you.
Just for time check, unfortunately, we're supposed to adjourn just before 4. I know the last item took a little while. What I'm going to suggest is I think you've given us enough for discussion. I just want to open up for discussion and then move on this item. I know we have a number of people waiting for public comments, right? Oh, I see. Nicole, you have your hand.
It's okay. I just had a follow-up question, but I can wait for the next panel on this subject. But great work on the tribal relationships.
Great. So if you can hear from you that question, and then I would want to open it up just for discussion. Sorry to cut it short, but
oh, it's no problem for me. I have a 5-year-old I have to pick up soon, so no problem for me. What I will say is I think it is a very exciting time to be engaging as someone who just came in April, to be engaging in this racial equity, overall equity, and tribal affairs work, because I like to call it, we're in the second phase where we have done the statements, we've done the kind of everyone's on board, and now we have to get to implementation. And really quick, some of the things that we are doing is all 12 Caltrans districts have equity committees inside of their districts working internally. It was a very opt-in process, so those committees look as vastly different as each Caltrans district, but it's able to be responsive to the equity needs in each Caltrans district. Another thing that's happening is we are working on creating community engagement coordinator, or putting community engagement coordinators in every district. These community engagement coordinators will be following projects and the engagement side of projects for the life of a project. So they will be, and again, we are, it varies depending on district, but these community engagement coordinators will be able to track, follow, and inform how engagement is happening over the life of a project. I think what is also really important as we start thinking about how we're implementing racial equity moving forward is if we don't have these processes for feedback, for accountability, if we don't have these feedback loops where communities can come in and tell us what's going on, then we're still not actually advancing racial equity work yet. So again, I'll talk about the EAC that we have, where that is an opportunity to get stakeholder feedback. These community engagement coordinators are another opportunity for that. Our NAC is another opportunity. Really quick, because we're wrapping up, I'll just throw out that on the tribal engagement side, some of the things that we're doing are just trying to create bigger set-asides. But with bigger set-asides, I think some of the things that we're finding out are if the processes and systems in place for the tribes to be able to get those set-asides aren't equitable, then what are we actually doing? And so we are also at the same time trying to make tribal contracting, streamline it, make it easier so that we can get more money out on the ground and more projects built that communities have a better say of shaping. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I would want to open it up for council discussion, and then we'll move to public comments. Nicole?
I should be much quicker. I really just wanted to ask how the tribal relationships are working in Lithium Valley, just because that is, Imperial Valley is, I call it Lithium Valley because that's kind of the new moniker, but obviously it's Imperial Valley, and there's just been obviously a lot of concerns about how that's going to move forward, given all the potential conflicts.
Yes, that's a great question. I think it depends. Well, so the California Energy Commission has been working really closely with a lot of the tribal leaders and California American tribes that are in that region to better understand their priorities as it relates to the protection of cultural resources, cultural landscapes, and natural cultural resources associated with the lithium production. And so in tribal consultations, identifying concerns and needs helps inform how that process moves forward in working with the entities that are pursuing these opportunities. There are also conversations around tribal priorities in this space. For a lot of tribes, there's an interest in ensuring there are resources for their communities, economic development opportunities, and other opportunities to help shape the future economy of the region. I also note that we have our Salton Sea management program at the California Natural Resources Agency as well, that is focused on restoration and improvement of the quality of the air and water in the Salton Sea region. And there has been I would say a beautiful growth in the partnerships between tribes and the Salton Sea program, and thinking about those restoration work projects for the Salton Sea, not only on state-owned land and private public lands, but also on tribal lands. And how can we plant resources or plant different species that benefit not only the environment, but also have cultural relevance to the tribes of the region, plus many other priorities. So I think there is a lot of growth and strengthening of partnerships in both topic areas in the region.
That's wonderful to hear. Because I admit, it just seems like we're just potentially creating more toxic hotspots, right? And just furthering environmental injustice potentially, but I don't know enough. So I appreciate you that it sounds like we might be mitigating that and hopefully preventing that. So thank you so much. Appreciate learning more.
Great.
Just have a comment.
One quick observation, Mr. Chair. I just think anything that we can do to accentuate the support that we provide, particularly for Native people, whether they're registered or not, it is just, we cannot do enough, period. And so I appreciate, I'm so admirous of you being in this role as a Native woman, and there's just more that we need to do. This is at the end of the day, we've gone through a lot. It really probably could be located differently in the future on the agenda so that we have a thorough engagement. But it's just, unless you create these policies and these programs and these grant and funding mechanisms, these communities will not enjoy the kind of access to these resources that others are at the moment enabled to. And so we just have to be very intentional. And so this is my intentional effort to acknowledge it. Great.
Yes, I have a quick question for the panel, and we do have many things I'm proud of at CDFA, and they're in the report, so I won't belabor that. But I wanted to ask, with the tribal and community engagement you're all doing, do you factor that into the administrative budgets for staff time? It's like a boring government question, but I feel like it's really important, because if that's not factored in, then we don't know how much time it's going to take and if we have the budget to do it. So I'm just wondering how you handle that.
Oh, how do we budget having the staff to do it? Well, I can tell you that we have more work than we have staff. for sure. And we just keep growing and, or the expectations keep growing. So, you know, it's a challenge. Every budget year is a bit of a challenge. We submit budget change proposals. Sometimes we're directed that we need to do something, and we need to be really clear about saying, well, we need the staffing to be able to do this, and this is what we need. And so we outline, you know, the number of staff that will be able to lift up the work. And as the work rolls out, we always find out that we don't have enough people because the work is so great.
Just a quick comment on, or do you want to answer as well?
Sorry.
Okay, just a quick comment on the reports. Really appreciated all the staff updates on the equity programs and policies, and appreciate all the work that's being done internally to improve our ability to shape our policies, programs, and workforce. I guess one thing I would, as we engage in this work, I'd love to see how we can unpack the work and tell to your point, the stories of how this is changing people's lives and how we're intentionally trying to move everyone in the right direction, but also consciously thinking about who's been left behind and tailoring solutions for them so they can also go in the right direction. But in ways that we can share that with the public so that it's very tangible and clear. I think about when I have conversations with my mom who, you know, asks me what I do every day as a chief equity officer and no longer practicing law in a traditional way. She's like, what does equity mean? You know, can you go back to being a traditional lawyer, please, so I can understand what that is? But that's what I think about, the conversations that I have at home. We have those conversations every day now in our communities, and they often ask, what does equity mean? I just want my life to get better. And what are you doing about it? And so if we can start telling the stories of the programs without acronyms or, you know, numbers and data, but in real tangible, concrete ways, how are we improving people's lives and helping those particularly who were left behind and continue to be left behind? Just food for further discussion in the future, perhaps, or now.
I would say data, you know, Dan, really data, right? How to collect the data, but also tell the story. You're right. We have to be able to measure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places to go with that, and given the time crunch, I'll limit it to two thoughts, which is I think sometimes when we talk about equity, we try and create these big buckets that everybody fits in. But when we are actually doing equity and practicing equity the most efficiently, it's really small buckets where we're not lumping disadvantaged communities into one, but we're naming the communities. We're power sharing, we're letting them have an opportunity to engage and lift up their own voices. And it's not just this DAC lump that we often can get caught up in. So I think that is one, figuring out how we, and so like similar to like what we're doing at Caltrans with the project level, having community engagement coordinators that are following at a project level that are able to look at, you know, who's the community that actually lives there now and not this hypothetical disadvantaged community. I think also too, sometimes when we're as equity practitioners, sometimes we can get really caught up in the story, which is really important, and the hearts and minds. And there's this idea that, you know, if we just make everybody an anti-racist and we share the story, then, you know, that's going to move policy. Yes, and we also sometimes just need to implement and put in policy that's going to be a guardrail so that no matter who are the people that are implementing it, we know that these communities are safe and protected. So it is like a very much both and. And so the storytelling is great and it's going to move us far, but sometimes it can be exploitive. Sometimes I think we can think that the story is the end, when really the story is the beginning of what the policy should look like. And so I'll leave it there.
I loved how you broke that down, the two, because I do think a lot of this work is in the weeds, right? And you need somebody who can take a highlighter to a policy and like, okay, this is that one particular word that is creating a barrier. But then you also need people who can be powerful communicators and explain how that one word and that one policy is having on the ground impacts that are being detrimental to a particular community or a particular subset of a community. And I really appreciate you bringing up the staffing question to that, because I think we need a bunch of different types of people in these types of roles. we need folks who are strong communicators that can tell that story. We also need somebody who wants to spend 8 hours a day, deep in the footnotes of a scientific report, finding the solution, right? And so when we're thinking about how do we shift our programs to ensure we have the right people and the right budgets to complete this work, it's important to know that there's a pipeline in place. There's different types of positions. There's different types of authorities for folks to engage in this type of equity work. And something that, I really want to just honor Deputy Secretary Schwartz's work on this. We amended our duty statements at the executive level of the California Natural Resources Agency to ensure that every single employee has part of their job is thinking about equity, having the space to be able to participate in the Heritage Months or plan the Heritage Months. And that is part of all of our jobs. While you need folks who that's their full-time primary job, it's also helpful to ensure that everyone has the space, has the authorization through that duty statement to be able to do this work. We also know that a lot of the folks who are tasked with the tribal affairs work, it's another hat on a full-time job. And so thinking about how do we shift our programs so we can have full-time tribal liaisons, and that those tribal liaisons have access to executive leadership for their departments, so they're able to communicate what they're hearing from tribes and have that space to be able to integrate tribal priorities into the work across the department. And so that is something we're actively working on, and a good number of our departments have found resources and shifted their staffing programs to be able to create these full-time senior tribal affairs professionals in their departments. And we're already seeing tribal partnerships become stronger by having somebody who is in a role like that.
Great. Anybody else? So I just, Aki, have your hand up?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
I wanted to first of all really thank the panel, and just really thank Geneva for her partnership. I think the fact that we've been able to work together has really strengthened our work. And I do, just piggybacking on what our colleagues have said, I think there's a lot of great work going on at the state. I was reflecting on, just pulling together the information for the SGC, for our sort of section of the equity section, the racial equity section. And, we were limited. There was kind of a word count that we were limited to. And I think it wound up being a page or two. But when I asked our departments, can you give me some updates on what you've done the last year? I literally got 16, I typed it all up and it was 16 pages, single space. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on. And I do think a lot about how are we communicating this to the public? Do they know what we're doing and that we're advancing in this work? Because I do think, that communication piece is important, and also just having that public support so that we can continue, because, my hope is, I'm the first, I'm really honored to be the first person in this position as a Deputy Secretary for Equity and Environmental Justice, at CNRA. And I hope that these positions remain, because, as Geneva said, they're extremely important. You need some focused positions to really, ensure that this work continues.
Great comment. I think one of the things outcome just hearing the three agencies is how much incredible work that is there that's being done internally with each agency, and how difficult the work is as well in terms of really getting it to where you can see and measure and the data and the outcome. I think in addition to Secretary Schwartz comments around how you communicate externally, I think we still have a lot of work to do how we communicate across state agencies. In each individual agencies, there are incredible work that is being done. outcome on equity from health is very different from what kind of outcome you look for from transportation, right? That there are common trends that we have to look at. How do we standardize it across state agency? That's really hard. That's the work I think we need to continue to work on, because at the end of the day, the clients and the public, it's the government, the state government. How is that institution being transformed? Not only sort of good results from each agency, but how do we, elevate the benefits by connecting the dots across agencies? I think that's what one of the things that the SGC structure gives us, that ability. We can talk about it and then connect the dots. Can we standardize our grant making so that whether it's tribal technical assistance or grants that we put out, or on racial equity in general, how do we connect the dots? I think those are the kinds of discussions that would be beneficial, because at the end of the day, it's about transformation of institutions. I quit this, I remember when I started my profession in planning architecture, climate focus was kind of, it's in its infancy. Usually it's like relegated into slow silo, and how do you connect to that? It has taken 30 years, 40 years for that to be it's second nature now. Anyone in any work, you just assume, climate mitigation or adaptation is part of the work. It becomes part of it. I think equity is in the early stages of that. It hasn't become ubiquitous in terms of how it appears everywhere versus within each sort of bucket. So it's exciting to see with state agencies how much work there's. And what I'm looking forward to is the Racial Equity Commission is now looking at sort of developing a framework, looking at across state agencies and see what is the framework, I think, scheduled to come in December of next year. So a lot of the work that you're doing is feeding into what they're looking at as well, so that we could be effective. So it's really encouraging and also exciting how this is becoming part of the state government. So with that, unless there's no questions from council members, I want to jump into public comments.
Thank you. There is one in-person public comment for this item and no virtual public comments. Will Laura O'Connor please step up to the podium?
Hi, yes, thank you, Laura O'Connor. I serve as an advisor. I actually live down in your territory, Member Capretz in North San Diego County, but I lived in the Bay Area for 25 years. And I was not planning on making public comment today, but this is the most exciting work, in my opinion and experience, honestly, along with the climate that's necessary, that's happening in California. And I want to acknowledge, you're probably listening, former Deputy Secretary Moises Moreno Rivera introduced me to this core work 2 years ago in the context of working with one of the communities that I advise. I work with 5 to 7 communities that are in your matrix that have applied and been successful in TCC, et cetera. So that's why I've been coming to meetings. But I wanted to comment that there's a question from the Allensworth community, just to be straight out. They would like to know in the core, and you all just spoke about this, how does the community on the ground who's engaging with a state agency such as state parks know about the work that's being done in core? We were told 2 years ago that they were just starting, and thank you, Deputy Schwartz, for your brilliant work, and I'm excited to hear the report as it comes up. How do they engage by knowing what's happening with state parks and specifically Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park? I've been asked to bring that question forward from this body's, so that's a question. Then I just wanted to, I'm going to say this now instead of getting up again for the final public comment. When I heard Secretary Moss's, I would call it anguish on the East Oakland community. I wanted to just make you all aware, I'm sure many of you are, that similar to the governor's apology to Indigenous folks, that's in process in the legislature right now to Black Californians. And there's a State of Black California tour that's going all over the state right now, looking at the measurements and the differentials between most Californians in investment and Black Californians is this to this in every single category, and especially in housing. So that is a legislative piece that's happening right now. I'll take 10 seconds instead of getting back up. But the State of Black California from the Black Caucus and the California Black Freedom Fund, they're meeting here in Sacramento on September 14th. And it'll be the fourth or fifth one of a statewide tour where they're talking to Black Californians all over. So I want to applaud you all in being forward thinking, because by next spring or the next legislative session, at least, there will probably be a formal apology from the governor to Black Californians, and you'll be ahead of the game there, that this has needed to happen for a long time. Thank you for moving it forward.
Thank you. That concludes public comment for this item.
Great. With that, it brings us to meeting adjournment. I really appreciate everyone's participation, the panelists. Can give them a round of applause. And thank you as well, SGC staff and public who joined online as well. So with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Talk about the travel. City PH.